Well, let's see. There's a lot of discussion going on the Later Day biplane and Blackburn today, isn't there? My, there is. Let's see. Hello! Now, the big discussions of today. Ooh, live chat. Hello, King's Rook. Hello, Kahedron. Hello, Carl Gasberg. Hello, Mate Slavic. Now, as you will notice, huge pile of books. In fact, it was very nearly 17 books, very nearly 18, 20 books. And you also might notice that I have, well, not an early Valentine's card behind me, but me and my girlfriend send cards not just for Valentine's Day, but for the first day we kissed, which happened to be on the 7th of February. So, because we're very un-British in that we're a bit soppy when it comes to these things. So, hello, there's my card from my girlfriend behind me. So, if she's watching, she is supposed to be watching, so. Of course, unfortunately, we are the opposite ends of the country. So, yeah. Before anyone gets worried that I've emptied a bottle of Iron Brew, don't worry, there's another one there. And also, I would like to deal with some scandalous rumours. It is not true that the doctors have found some blood in my Iron Brew. They are 100% convinced that I am 100% Iron Brew. Okay, the rumours, the scandalous idea that's going around that you can find some blood in it is just wrong, and it should be shot down immediately. Right, hello John Shea, hello Constant Drowsiness, hello Rick Vasava, and let's... Hello Dunrick Ironhammer. John Shea, I wouldn't be surprised if this aircraft cult thing turns into a dumpster fire in the next 5 minutes. I would be surprised if it does turn into a dumpster fire 20 years from now. The Blackburn cult has outlived all expectations for how long it would last. So, who knows? Who knows? So I'm starting to get worried that I'm going to be getting a note, as I said, a note from some particular group or census keepers going, "What have you created?" Yeah, well, that's what I voted. We start with the book on top of the stack and work our way down. We can do that. That can be an option. We will have the vote start in a second. When I get through the hellos, then I will start the voting. Hello, Neil Woodall. There is now also entering the A-10 as a holy divine aircraft into the debate. At some point, I just know someone's going to put the B-52 in there. I just know it's coming. Hello, Nautical Wolf. Hello, Jack Hunter. Shane F. Hello. Nick Walters. Hello. DGB40. Hello. Oh, let's see. Oh, good lord, that's gone. That's skipped quite a few people. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Greg Satowski. Hello. Everything's new well. Hello, old Richard. Hope you're well. Hello, Aviator Enterprise. Yes, I'm doing okay. Nick Waters, I trust my pre-order joined lots of others. There are lots of things coming in. I would say this. There are some people, yes, I'm hoping a pre-order of my book has, but there's some people who've been asking me to review certain books. This one and this one. They will be part of next week's. They have literally arrived. There are some more coming. I'm going to tack them onto the beginning of next week's review. All I will say at this moment is that when they are reviewed, you're going to like them. But you'll want to hear about them before you make your decision as to whether to buy them or not, because they're good books, but whether they're good for you to buy depends on your interests. Okay? Hello, Strom. Hello, Michael Rose. How about Albazaski? Hello, Pavel M. Hello, Sadmiral. Hello, King's Rook. I think I'm on my 6th can of Coca-Cola, so you're in good company. That's good. I am brew in veins. You should be worried if Drago turns into a vampire. Well, that would probably go for both of us. Hello, Tom Golding. Hello. Let's see. Hello, Loki1392. Hello, and King's Rook, current Holy Aircraft, PBY Catalina, Blackburn, Arvaro Arrow, A10 and B52. Oh, good lord. Right then, so now I've caught up with the hellos, and thank you everyone for joining me. Today's topic is international relations, and that's what we're going to be looking at, IR. And because I wanted to do it in a sort of different way, in that I wanted to have some history books which are really have nothing to do with international relations in the title as part of it, and some which do have a lot of it in their title, and basically show how both can be interesting for it, I've set it up so we've got 16 books, which you can see most of in the camera. Now, the idea is, I will say, right, next book, and whichever of the first 5 responses is the most common one, or the first one, if they're all different ones, will be the one we start with. I'm doing it this way because, well, I just thought it'd be fun, and that way it'd be quite cool. They're all listed in the description. So all the books are listed in the description. So it's completely up to you when we start. Hello, Crazy Loca. I don't think I've seen it. Lol, plus 5 cups of coffee so far this afternoon. Well, that's good. Growth asking, when have we penciled the religious wars in for? I need to update my calendar. If they're religious wars over aircraft, that could be a very interesting and very short war. Although my money then is on which, let's see, my money's on the Arvaro Arrow winning that one. Shrub, does the Doctor RN does the RN have dedicated training teams for training with foreign navies? They have FOST, which used to be flag off. I think it's flag officer sea training still. I'm not sure. Is it flag officer or is it a fleet officer sea training? That looks after training and make sure to train the Royal Navy, but usually it's just the general crews. Trust me, the Americans do like to ask that question quite a bit, especially after an astute visits their training areas for training with their carriers. Because usually they just get just at the end of the 3-day exercise, they get a load of pictures of the underside of their carrier, and they get very upset. Tom Golding, I propose a Splinter cult, the cult of the single-use merchant catapult-launched Hulk Hurricane. I would certainly understand a cult supporting the poor pilots of those aircraft. Hello, Josie100. Starting Super Bowl Sunday with Bruships. You're going to have a good day. I'm glad. So, in chat for Vote or Discord, in chat on the YouTube. This is what we're sort of... So, there are a list. Please vote for the first book now. To join us, I'm getting a double dose of naval history and comparative religion. Yeah. It seems like a great presence mission. It's an interesting one. Are we nice enough to point out the scratches? Yes, we do. Gunboat Diplomacy is coming in on the first vote. Came in. That's always a good one. Let's see. Any more votes coming in? Cable, please. Well, that's also could go for a gunboat. Well, that's the one it's looking like. It's 2 votes already. Statecraft by Thatcher. Ooh, so that's the second on that one. Cable. And then Renaissance Monarchy. Well, it looks like it's going to be Gunboat Diplomacy by James Cable. Renaissance Monarchy by Glen Richardson. You will enjoy if we do that one in a bit. Ooh, Nuclear Deterence. Britain's Future Navy. Cool. So, we're going to start off with Gunboat Diplomacy. Now, this is one of my favourite books to look at, and one of my favourite books to have a discussion of, because so much of it gets put to one side and ignored as people just focus in on the gunboat. They just focus in on that one phrase and write it off as imperial, or, oh, he's being rude, or he's doing this, and it's not. Alright then. Let's go to one of my favourite chapters in this book. And we'll start off with the introduction. Principles and precedents of limited naval force. Limited is a victim of slipshod extension, a lazy habit of treating limited as a convenient synonym for many more suitable and more exact words. To limit is to confine within bounds. This is a citation. He's quoting a gentleman called Fowler. Now, let me just tell you where that source comes from. He has long chapters, as you can see. That's Modern English Usage, Fowler, Oxford University publication 1965. So literally, he's got a quote from the dictionary as he's starting off. At 20 minutes to 4, in the cold darkness of the morning of the 14th of February 1940, a Norwegian Coast Guard rang up the curtain on one of the classic dramas of gunboat diplomacy, perhaps the purest instance in recent times of the definitive use of a limited naval force in isolation from all other means of pressure. As the Morse stuttered to and fro, the accustomed routine was methodically applied. Et ukigent skip war comet in par Frohaven fra Surun. An unknown ship had come in from the sea to enter the Frohund, the stretch of water that divides the Froen Islands from the mainland, and constitutes the northerly approach to Trondheim. News was confirmed by the Coast Guard station at Tustna, and a torpedo boat, Trig, sailed from Kristiansund on yet another of the routine investigations by which the Norwegian Navy were accustomed to uphold the neutrality of their country in those early months of an undoubted but still dormant European war. Her report that afternoon was reassuring. The unknown ship was a tanker bound for Germany from the United States. She had confirmed with the requirements of Norwegian neutrality by dismounting her anti-aircraft guns. She had no passengers on her name aboard. Her name was Altmark. But Admiral Tank Nielsen, Norwegian area commander, was a stickler for detail. Trig had reported Altmark as an armed merchant ship, but had not provided satisfactory answers to all the 17 questions specified for such vessels in Article 21 of the relevant standing instructions. 2 further visitations, this time by the torpedo boat Snog, in the event or evening of the 14th and the morning of the 15th, still failed to satisfy the Admiral, who put to sea himself in the destroyer Garm, and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon of the 15th sent his chief of staff on board Altmark, which had meanwhile been continuing her southward journey through Norwegian territorial waters under the escort of Snag. By 4:15 that afternoon, both Norwegian Commander-in-Chief in Oslo and Mr. Bull, the Secretary-General of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, had received Admiral Tank Nielsen's initial report. It was brief, but it revealed the reasons for his stubborn persistence. 3 words of muted brass were enough to make the first entry the essential Wagnerian drama, Limotov. Anatag Fanger on board. Probably prisoners on board. Admiral Tank Nielsen was more than meticulous. He was alert and far-seeing. Over a month earlier, he had spotted a story in the Oslo newspaper Aftenposten that the German naval auxiliary Altmark was expected to cross the Atlantic with 400 British prisoners en route to Germany. He had immediately addressed a special circular to his command, calling attention to this report. By one of those mischances familiar in all navies and other organisations of the world, this circular never reached the commanders of Trig and Snog, but it explains Admiral Tank Nielsen's reluctance to accept the repeated denials, as relayed to him by subordinates, of the Altmark's captain. No passengers here, there are no persons on board who belong to the armed forces of another belligerent country, nor are there civilians of a belligerent country. It explains his demand to inspect the ship, and when this was refused on the grounds that Altmark was a state ship flying the Reichsflag, his decision that, without inspection, Altmark might not traverse the waters of the Bergen defended area, a decision that would have required her to follow a course only just inside Norwegian territorial limits. The Admiral's attitude was not determined by the Affen person alone. His chief of staff had heard and seen for himself, as Oslo had been informed later in that evening, SOS signals from the Altmark's forecastle, and noted the efforts of the crew to hide them by working the winches and slamming their deadlights. But Admiral Tank Nielsen was also prudent and circumspect officer, careful not to let his personal sympathies override the obligations of discipline and responsibility. He had neither disregarded the legal force of Captain Dow's refusal of search, nor sought to present his superiors with a fait accompli. His decision to refuse passage through the defended area was a compromise that neatly avoided any direct clash on the delicate central issue, which he nevertheless indicated to his superiors with a concise clarity: "Antal tag fanga on board." There is no suggestion in Norwegian documents that these three ominous words were discussed between the Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Nielsen, and Mr. Bull, before the latter went off to change for his dinner at the Brazilian legation. Their conversations had turned on the right of naval auxiliaries, as opposed to actual warships, to passage through the defended area. On the signal of the protest dispatched by Altmark's captain, and on the desirability of speeding a ship on her way before detection by the British, gave rise to an awkward situation. At 5:30 that afternoon, Admiral Nielsen, the Telegraph's escort, let the vessel pass in her capacity as a state ship escort. As you can tell, this book is about a lot more than just gunboat diplomacy, than just sending in a warship. Cable is one of those authors who is most often overlooked, because if I said the words naval theorist to you, most people respond with Corbett and Mahan. Some might even respond with Tirpitz. Others might come with Fisher. You could probably come up with make a case for Richardson. Richmond. As well, it's not Richardson. Richardson is the author of this book. Richmond, who pre-World War II is a bit of a theorist, also a bit of a nutter, but a bit of a theorist. Cable is the most prolific naval theorist we have who writes during the Cold War in the 1970s and 80s. Yet he's possibly the least well-known of the lot. Nowadays, we don't seem to have theorists. Nowadays, we have think tanks and people who hide behind a committee rather than making a statement themselves. But this is definitely a work of a theorist. It's got a lot of history in, but it's a work of a theorist. Hello, Dan Freeman. I'm worried now. Hello, Stafford Thompson. I hope you're well. I know there's a message from you on Discord which I haven't responded to, but that's because literally yesterday I did about 9 or 10 hours working on the shed, and by the end of the day my brain was basically going, Because someone should make t-shirts. I think at some point I am going to probably make a Blackburn t-shirt, as long with an Eskimo t-shirt. Possibly it'll be "Don't mention the Blackburn" on a t-shirt. Afternoon, Jeff Beeler. That guy named Dan. One man in cleanse in holy fires, another man reduced to ashes. Oh, good lord, this is worrying. Not a wolf. Can you explain why the Altmark could stay in the territorial waters even after refusing inspection? because she was technically classifying herself as a state ship, which meant inspecting her would be like inspecting a warship. You can't inspect a warship. But she's also classifying herself as being a merchant ship for entry into waters. So the problem is, once she's in the waters, if they then kick her out, that will create a fuss with the Germans because they claim she's a state ship. Because she'd be kicked out into the waiting arms of the Royal Navy going, "Hello! We'd like to make friends, really. Very close friends. We're coming for a boarding time." Whereas if they leave her in, basically, you have to remember that Hank Nielsen is pretty much going on the "we've got to be whiter than white, purer than pure." Basically, we've got to look like a freshly carpeted piece of snow, and the only way we can do that is by sticking strictly to the lines. His higher command, Nielsen, etc., well, you all know my opinion of the Norwegian government prior to 1940. They really, even during World War II, they're not the quickest on the uptake. And their policy is that they must avoid provoking either side. And their method of avoiding provoking either side is to try and cast a blind eye in many ways over what's going on, to ignore it. It's come in, we have these strong suspicions, because we haven't searched it, we have no proof, so therefore let it through and get it out of our area as quickly as possible. However, for the Norwegians, they forget one small issue. And this is the point. If the Altmark had got home through their waters, and the Germans had then trumped it, the British would have taken that as Norway's no longer neutral, and B, Norway would have had to wait like 5 minutes before the British probably invaded. As, remember, both the British and the Germans are maintaining invasion plans at this point. The Germans push theirs on because the Altmark incident happens, and the Norwegians, basically the British get to the ship in Norwegian waters, which the Germans take as Norwegian neutrality no longer counts for anything. Either way, the Norwegians are in trouble. Honestly, the only chance they really would have had is if they had kicked the Altmark straight out and gone, "Nope!" and basically been as hard as they could. But, again, to do that, they'd have to start paying money and actually activating their armed forces and actually acknowledging there's a war going on, which might affect them. All these things which they don't actually do. Definitely. Now I need to get back to multitasking and reading about Jellicoe's tour of the Dominions of 1919. Ooh, that's fun. Oh, Richard, Blackburn t-shirt, want. Yes. Hello, Derp Squad. No worries, I'm hanging there. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to help with the office. It'd be done now, probably if I'm over. I actually been having this conversation with Drac a lot, who is incredibly helpful. And Drac is amazingly helpful, as you all know. He's a lovely, lovely guy. Seriously, he is one of the nicest people. He's a very, very good friend. And very, very nice. But it is it's one of those things where if this had been normal times, not COVID time, and we'd had this sort of construction done in the back garden, I would probably have had the base poured by professionals and had the concrete done by professionals, because honestly, that makes sense. But the whole office, I'd have probably got friends in, because I teach engineering history, so I teach civil engineers and all sorts of people. I've got well, there's Drac as well, of course, who's a civil engineer. I've got my sister. We've got enough people who are engineering, woodworking orientated. We could have built it ourselves rather than have builders come do it. But it's because we couldn't have friends in, we had to have a builders group do it, and the builders have managed to not do it properly. Which I don't know why, because it's the wood version of Lego. It really is the wood version of Lego. You just have to follow the instructions. And the things literally slot in on top of each other. Magislavic, do we know anything about the new USF LR project? Nothing really new. There's a lot still being recycled that's being talked about it. Then India, Australia, Pacific Islands, New Zealand, and Canada. This was a report that recommended making a base in Singapore. It was one of the two, yes. JP, what is everyone's favourite Sender Gunboat incident? Ooh, so many. Dan Freeman, Jellicoe also had this strange notion that the Solomon Islands and New Guinea might be important in a war with Japan. Weird, huh? Yeah. Grosowski, Jellicoe was seriously unappreciated. I know, I was listening to one of Drac's things, and someone was saying what would have happened if Fisher had been born as a girl, and so hadn't therefore been able to join the Admiralty, or the Navy at all. And there are enough people around that I wouldn't be... I'm not sure whether we'd have had Dreadnought built first. I don't know. There were other people around who might have... You see, the thing is, Fisher is in many ways both forges his career and is a product of his career. So you have to think other people would have taken those roles where he had. Those events would still have happened. They'd have just had a different person in them. And they could have forged someone else who might have been more stable, you never know. Less prone to genius, but more stable and productive overall. Japan, 1905, at Itaji, Brazil SMS Panther conducted an unauthorized search in pursuit of a German deserter by the name of Hassmann. They ended up kidnapping, inexplicably, a German named Fritz Sindorf. Hello, Felix B. Hello, I'm late. Was woodworking probably inspired by Dr. Clark? Expect more of those videos to be coming through tomorrow or Tuesday. Today, I've spent most of my time building a wall, building the wall up and making the wall fit. And sorting out. Now I'm putting up lines of the... I've been fixing parts of the roof. And we've got to work on the base. And possibly put up some more shingles for the guttering. And yeah, there's a list of jobs which need to be doing. And then it needs to be painted. That's good. And I think whatever happened, Norway was going to be invaded. Refused to let Altmark in. Germany says they're pro-British invade. Let it in, and Germany invades to protect from UK. You're forgetting Britain would invade as well. Honestly, though, the question is, if the British get into Norway first, does Germany manage to get in? That's the interesting question, because if Britain gets into Norway first, you can guarantee they'll try to find some way of getting radar across there. And if they manage to get in and get dug in before the Germans get there, then all those ports, which are key ports for German entry, suddenly they're turning up and there's a British garrison there going, "Hello! You sent some friends! We were prepared with machine guns." It's just not nice. And you've got some destroyers? Hello! Meet 4th Flotilla. Hello! We're here to say hi, and these are our buddies from 6th Flotilla. Yes! Welcome to the joy of 16 tribal destroyers. Which one of you's coming in first? Oh, you want to say that? Well, we'll come out for you. Because remember, the Germans' torpedoes aren't working that well on their submarines. Their destroyer torpedoes are a bit iffy as well. it's not a fun thing for them if Norway happens early. Not a wolf. Thanks, Doctor. They really were between a rock and a hard place. Your Norway videos were iron. Just couldn't quite understand the alt mark till now. It is a bit... Well, I have seen quote-unquote builders who failed at IKEA cabinets, so... Sam Thompson, I could have made it over to help if not supervised. You were very busy. As I said, if it hadn't been COVID rules again, so we were trying to keep away because of protecting mum and sister because they're shielded. They would have had me staring over them and my sister staring over them for quite a lot of the build, keep popping out there. So basically, everything worked against us. Right. Next book, anyone? You know where the list is. The book list is in the description. Please go through. We've gone through Cable's Gunboat Diplomacy, so next book. And remember, it'll be the first 5 responses I'll go with. Basically, luckily for Switzerland, the Rhine was not navigable above Strasbourg before the end of the 19th century. Otherwise, RM might have shown up. One of those interesting things is every time I see those maps which have the purport to show the list of all the countries Britain's been to war with, they miss off countries. Tom Golding, my history teacher at Pangbourne was a big fan of Beatty. Consider him hard done by and a bit of a character. I would agree, he's a bit of a character. Dan Freeman, Beatty was, I might concede, slightly better than Mountbatten. That's really not setting that high a bar. Who created Mountbatten, of course, famously created the Ministry of Defence because you can never understand any form of joint organisation being formed which wouldn't have an admiral in charge. Then look at the Chiefs of the Defence Staff and the Ministry of Defence and find out how often an admiral has actually been in charge of it. Absolutely, wouldn't Norway impose a British invasion as well? Considering how well the Norwegians did at imposing a German invasion, I'm not sure they'd do well at imposing opposing a British invasion. And to be honest, the British would probably handle it slightly different because they wouldn't impose a Quisling government on the Norwegians. And seeing as the British would probably publicise the Altmark incident and say we can't trust your government now to impose their own neutrality, there would be enough of a dividing thing that people might not like their own government. There's always the option that maybe the King of Norway actually sides with the British on this one, as long as the British aren't doing an actual occupation. They're just in a force. They're just doing a presence in force. Neil Woodall, not deployment so much as a result. US Marines to Nicaragua in the 1920s and resulting war. Ooh. In Racket by Smedley. Ooh, that's a cool book. 16 tribals and 1 bow from Exon just bobbing around. Nuclear Deterence. Deterence comes in at 2. And then it's Roosevelt, Thatcher, and Statecraft. So, it's Nuclear Deterrence. Oh, Lord. Oof. I should say not pick a book from the bottom. Yeah. Nuclear Deterrence. Oh. There are 2 books by Jeremy Black in this, yes. So, Nuclear Deterrence in Southeast Asia. China, India, and Pakistan by Arpit Rajain. Let's see, this is one of those books which really does. At the time of the British withdrawal from South Asia in 1947, a movement largely orchestrated by the All-Indian Muslim League under Muhammad Ali Jinnah led to the emergence of Pakistan out of the predominantly Muslim northwestern and eastern extremities of the subcontinent. The partition in 1947 can be seen to be the logical conclusion of the Muslim League's intransient championing of a sovereign Muslim state. A separate Pakistan was in the offing since the 1942 Cripps mission. Mahatma Gandhi, in fact, went a step further, and in his talks with Jinnah in 1944, accepted the right of self-determination. Ever since its birth, Pakistan had been beset with internal contradictions, and has been an insecure and unsure state. As Ralph Bradley described it, no other new nation which gained independence after 1945 has experienced the variety or the intensity of traumas that Pakistan has suffered. Ensuring the survival of the state has been a challenge for the policymakers. A narrow survivalist model of national security has dominated the political discourse of the country. India was and continues to be a major external cause of Pakistan's insecurity. But its demonstration at the elite and popular level was also an instrument through which domestic consolidation could be engineered to an extent. The political elite has often explained the India threat to the largely illiterate population. It is this narrow militaristic framework of national security that continues to be the central pillar in Pakistan's strategic calculations. Few other states have experienced it. As the political scientist Norman D. Palm puts it, crisis of identity, of legitimacy, of integration, of participation, of penetration, and of distribution, to the degree Pakistan has. The larger dimensions of security, the precarious economic conditions, and the growing culture of drugs, small arms proliferation, the breakdown of law and order in Sindh and Karachi, perhaps besides the challenges of governance necessitated by the tardy development of political institutions, do not figure in mainstream national security discourse. Some of this can be attributed to the contradictions that Pakistan inherited at the time of partition. It is forgotten that Nehru, Patel, and Gandhi in 1947 were only accepting what had become inevitable because of the long-term failure of the Congress to draw in the Muslim masses into the national movement and stem the surging waves of Muslim communalism, which, especially since 1937, had been beating with increasing fury. Pakistan did not have a clear roadmap for a new state ready to play a role in the Comity of Nations. The biggest contradiction was the geographical challenge of administering East and West Pakistan, separated by nearly 2,000 kilometers of Indian territory. The demand for a corridor through India was turned down. Political and social integration in Pakistan was also proved to be a difficult and expensive process. As analyst Ronak Jack said, only a small elite can afford to have inter-wing contact, which means that the national elite tends to be narrowly oligarchic. Another contradiction was the raison d'etre of Pakistan. The country was created to be a separate homeland for Muslims, but Jinnah envisioned it as a modern liberal democratic state. Jinnah was educated in Britain and was personally not deeply religious. Speaking to Pakistan's Constituent Assembly, he said, "You may belong to any religion, caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state." These views of the founder of the state were soon overtaken by the Objectives Resolution passed by the Constituent Assembly in March 1949. As Binder says, the fact that the Jannah at-e-Islami accepted the Objectives Resolution as the expression of intent of the government to make Pakistan an Islamic state testified the fact that it had departed from the vision of its founder, M.A. Jinnah. Each of the four constitutions since then has contained Islamic provisions, though there have always been powerful voices both within Islamic circles and among liberals on the interpretation of the Islamic content of the constitution. The early constitutional debates had been conducted in the background of a battle between Islamic fundamentalists and liberals. The first group was led by the Ulama, who had been demanding an Islamic state based on Sharia, and the second were those who wanted a parliamentary form of government on the Western model. Clearly, Pakistan had a problem of identity right from the beginning. History created a deep sense of victimization that led to a sense of insecurity. This sense of insecurity soon made India the bigger neighbor that could someday attack Pakistan, and this provided the justification for the acquisition of nuclear weapons. Finally, Pakistan was not clear about what role it would play in the new, changing international system, where more and more African and Asian nations were freeing themselves from colonial governments. This mindset, which left a deep imprint on the people, perhaps strengthened the role armed forces would play in shaping the destiny of the country. It's a very interesting book because it's one of those books which really does delve into the fact that foreign policy is often as much a product of the perception forced on you by internal politics as it is what is actually happening externally. I.e., there is what is happening, and there is your perception of what is happening, filtered through your lens of understanding of your own internal system. And the fact is, honestly, that's all sides. It's to a lesser or greater extent, it might differentiate from this what is happening, but it is because of your experience internally that you perceive what's happening externally. For example, if you're in America at the moment and it was a terrible experience and it's been terrible what's happened, the rather absurd in many ways thing that happened at the Capitol about a month or so ago is a massive thing. But if you were talking to someone from, let's say, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or a fair number of other African or South American states, for example, in Bolivia, where regularly armed parties used to wander up and down certain highways, they'd sort of look at it and go, yeah, it happens. To us, looking on at America, in Britain, we haven't seen such a thing happen in such a way since the English Civil War. It's completely shocking because we don't have it in our internal framework. But to countries which do have an internal framework, there's something going, yeah, welcome to the club. All right. Nautical Wolf, down. There are too many good books to choose from. That's the whole point. That's why there are 16. Sometimes I'm just not sure if they have time. With the Brits there, the Germans wouldn't have a choice then not to push the issue. Well, they'd try, but would they really get there? And that's the thing. If there's enough Brits there, no problems. Javier, convincing Norway to fully mobilise could be an end in and of itself. I do not think Germany can successfully invade Norway in that case. No need for the UK to occupy Norway. That would be a good thing as well, if UK could convince Norway to fully mobilise. Because then Germany couldn't invade Norway. Either you have the British there waiting for them, or you have the Norwegians fully mobilised. Either way, then the Germans don't win in Norway. That's good. I think that the only way the British can seem legitimate invading Norway is at the invitation of the king. The invasion of Iceland by Nuremberg trial precedent was an act of offensive war, and going by the punishments, Churchill should have spent several years in prison if precedent applied to Allied leaders. Yes, but because Denmark had already been invaded, and technically Denmark was the protector of Iceland along with Greenland, and the US went in to turn Greenland into a protectorate, and because the British invaded Iceland and then turned it over to the Americans as a protectorate, and British basically said, we're coming here to protect you from German invasion, it's one of those issues where it's enough of a grey area that no one actually wants to pursue it, because once you start down that road, you can go to a lot of issues. Neil Waddle, when Norway did finally send out mobilisation notices, they were by mail. Yep. No, they must have messed up that shed. They have messed up it up, yes. Bixby. Well, the fun about nuclear deterrence. Even Switzerland tried to build a nuclear bomb, but stopped after the ban on nuclear testing. Always lawful, not like ours. Well, you know. It doesn't. I think you need to exercise more. Anyway, after another 12 books, you'll be able to get from from the bottom one pile, the bottom of the pile without much effort. I do need to exercise more. I basically, if you consider before lockdown, I was daily at the gym. I would go every morning, about 7:30, and now I don't go with lockdown and shielding my mum and sister. So yeah, I've got to get back to the gym. I should start running the roads, but every time I've run the roads, I end up breaking something, and then I'm put back for months anyway of training. So I just I don't do it. I just end up hurting myself every time I go road running. I should get my bike out of storage. Many a European nation that was never invaded by or fought the British Germans have had an interesting relationship with fascism and neo-Nazism. Yep. Alright, let's see. JP, why was Pakistan not split into two countries in the beginning? The idea was it was illogical. Just don't go there. There was lots and lots of weird politics going on then. That was good. The Icelandic people weren't really going to start a resistance. There's often talk of the Icelandic people starting a resistance. Not really so, because there wasn't really much to resist. The British weren't really occupying in terms of telling people what to do or enforcing a curfew. They literally had set up a garrison and put people there and then went, they're there. We're not really going to do much more. They're wandering around. They're a bit of a visible presence because they're doing patrols, but they're not really doing anything more than that. It's kind of, as occupations go, it's kind of embarrassing because they're just they're not really, even the British people, the British officers there, are not really sure what, they know they're there to protect against a German invasion. They're not really sure what they're supposed to do about the public, and they don't really want to do anything because they're not there to hurt them or interfere with them, so it's kind of one of those strange things in that the British are sort of trying to be there, but not be there, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yes, Vietnam could have been avoided back in 1918. That's good, yes, but the garrison was about 2 platoons. They probably wouldn't have attacked the garrison, but rather made the UK have to place more troops as garrison. Honestly, it's one of those things. It was an affront to their parliament, an affront to them on a political level, but on a unit level, most of the squaddies were getting on quite well with the Icelandic people. They were buying food, drinking beer, rations, food was being shared, fish was being sold. It was one of those things. It was you cannot underestimate how unusual it was as an experience. Okay, all the accounts of Iceland I've read from both British and Icelandic sources, and I can't claim I've read all of them, so I'm not exhaustive. But all the ones I've read have pointed out that it was a very unusual experience. Tom Golding. One of the most interesting things about the first Indo-Pakistan War was in the composition of the High Command. Lots of British officers from the former British Indian Army serving in the Indian forces. Yeah. Come on, UK convincing Belgium to fully mobilise and buy tanks would also be good. Oh, we could always dream. No, Wolf, you can say much of the Cold War is based on that logic, if I understand it correctly. Our bias and viewpoints might work for us as a country, but we have to remember other countries have their own, and you have to adjust. Yep. Dev Squad, the secret of road running is to run on pavement. That way you can avoid the cars. That's the trouble in my area. The pavement is the problem. In that, it's just, the road surface is quite well maintained. The pavement is terrible. And you find yourself, there are all sorts of, the manhole covers have been put in by about 5 different companies. And some of them stick up, some of them are have corners which stick out, and then it's the patches of black ice, and you end up hurting yourself. You just end up hurting yourself. In fact, this is why all the runners in my area seem to run on the road. And honestly, there are too many cars. I'm not that keen on that one as an idea. It would be hard. Also, number of refugees after partition was big, or even bigger than that after World War II in Central Europe. Yep. Jeff Elam, Iceland was occupied by Canadians at first. Yes, I think so. There were, I think it was Canadian troops with British warships. Derp Squad, the most embarrassing thing about UK Iceland is when the British invaded, an old Icelandic man broke the police line and corrected his rifle, saying, "Don't hurt yourself, stupid boy." A British squaddy's rifle. That story is one of those ones which goes around, yet I've yet to find an official account of it. This is going to sound strange. I hear about it. There are lots of people who hear about it happening, but I haven't found an official account of it happening. So there's part of me which wonders whether it's one of those stories which gets made up. But it might well be true. I don't know. Peter Dawson. At the clock. Et al. Iceland had 98 squadron RAF with ferry battles. Last combat use of battles in British service. Previously, they'd been decimated in the Low Countries when the Germans attacked. Adam Flinton, that's a good joke. Don't know, so it's an obstacle course. Pretty much. Do not ever jog with my fluffy research assistants. Do not. I have tried jogging with a poodle in the past. The trouble is a poodle's high-speed run is basically a pongo action in that they are jumping up and down. And at a certain point, they spring high enough, they start pulling you up in the air. You can run with Cocker Spaniels. Labradors, quite fine. Full-on standard poodle running, and you running next to it is an interesting experience. Crazy Lurker, how much of a fawn would the Jones have been from base in Ireland? A very big fawn. A very big fawn, because they could have impacted a lot of the Atlantic, and if they managed to keep it resupplied, there'd have been a lot of problems for British. But there again, then you'd have had the Germans running a convoy course back and forwards to Iceland from Norway, and so Royal Navy submarines would get a lot of wolf pack kills. Dirt Scott, Jeff Wheeler, when you realised that the partition of India was planned by Mountbatten, the presence of random nonsense should make sense. See. Jebilo, 2nd Canadian Division, then the 49th fresh from Norway, who became the Polar Bears. Finally, the 2nd US Marine Corps Brigade also were there. Neil Woodall, establishing a base and supplying a base are two different things. Yeah, yep. Dan Freeman, I'm now wondering whether you could have sent an occupation force from Newfoundland and said they were Leif Erikson's people coming home, not an invasion. Interesting idea. I doubt you could get enough troops together in Newfoundland that quickly. Right. Next book. What do you want? As I said, it's in the list in descriptions. The ones which have times by them are the ones we've already gone through. Death Squad, leaving the incident out of the official record means both the invading troops and the Icelandic police and government save face. Probably. But the thing is, it's going to sound strange, sergeants have a habit of writing these things up because usually a sergeant will be explaining to their particular squaddy what was the problem was. We had River Plate, Margaret Thatcher again. Naval Future, Global Economy. Will be the 5th one. Oh, River Plate. Another one for the River Plate has snuck in. So, River Plate it is. Yeah. River Plate. Dudley Pope's River Plate. We always love this one. We always love the River Plate. This is one of those books which has great drawings in it. There are some books which don't have good maps. This one has a really good map in it. Doesn't give you any bearings at all, so this is just a squiggle, but it's pretty accurate for the naval battle. In that you can see Grass Bay, and you can tell when she's making smoke. Because these fuzzy things happen. And you can see the lines of the ships, the British ones. And where they go. And you can also tell where Exeter goes, and where she then goes. Daybreak on the 14th found every man available in the Grass Bay hard at work. The bodies of the 37 men killed in the action were being prepared for burial, and the 57 wounded were to be removed ashore for treatment. Repair parties were busy plugging innumerable splinter and shell holes. The pocket battleship was estimated to have been hit more than 50 times. Clearing away wreckage and repairing electric leads and making a list of special equipment necessary to make good some of the more extensive damage. The load on Captain Langsdorff's shoulders were, to a certain extent, being eased. At sea, he had no one with whom he could discuss decisions. The command of a ship is a lonely, isolated task. Now he had an abundance of talent to help him, and was in direct contact with Berlin. The German naval attaché at Buenos Aires immediately flew over to Montevideo with the German civilian constructors and boarded the Grass Bay. The German ambassador at Montevideo, Dr. Otto Langmann, was already on board by the time he arrived. Captain Langsdorff, by now almost completely exhausted by lack of sleep and worry, outlined the position to the two men. The Grass Bay was unfit to go to sea because of the action damage, and he could not feed his men properly because the galley was wrecked. He had 61 British Merchant Navy officers on board, and he proposed to free them almost immediately. And it was essential that he should discover what British reinforcements were due. Dr. Langman, a stockily built and tested little man, who wore a pince-nez, then told Langsdorff of the mistake he had made in entering the Uruguayan harbour, instead of going to Buenos Aires, where the atmosphere would probably be more cordial. The British and French governments, he said, would very soon be exerting the strongest pressure on the politically weak Uruguay to make sure the Graf Spee was either allowed to stay no more than 72 hours. In fact, Britain was pressing for only 24 hours on the grounds that Graf Spee had steamed into harbour at high speed, so she was obviously seaworthy, allowed by international law, or that she was to be interred if she overstayed that period. Then both Langman and the naval attaché went ashore for a conference with the Uruguayan foreign minister, Dr. Guiani. Meanwhile, the Graf Spee's engineer, Corvette Capitan Klepp, and the German civilian constructor from Buenos Aires were making a detailed inspection of the whole ship to estimate how long it would take, bearing in mind local facilities to get her ready for sea. The major items on their list were for small leaks in sections 1 to 3, and several more about 6 inches of diameter, at and under waterline at section 13 on the starboard side, and 2 in sections 5 and sections 14. And one about 5 inches in diameter at the waterline at section 10 on the port side. The underwater holes had been plugged, but the others, along with several 8-inch holes in the upper deck, would have to be welded. Please note, 6-inch holes. What size caliber of weapon do we think made a 6-inch hole? This is, but it's only Exeter which scores any hits on the mighty Graf Spee that damage her, isn't it? Oh. The galley would also need a good deal of work on it. There was some damage to fighting equipment which have to be made good if the Graf Spee was to go into action effectively again, and there was also an unexploded British shell embedded in the hull to be removed. Klepp and the constructor talked it over and decided that a minimum of 14 days would be needed for the crew and civilian workmen with equipment to get the ship ready for sea. They reported their findings to Langsdorff. He immediately passed them on to Dr. Langman, who found himself in something of a quandary. He wanted to get as long a stay as possible for the Graf Spee, but on the other hand, he did not want to reveal to the British the extent of the damage. In the end, he sent a note to the Uruguayan foreign minister requesting permission for a stay of 14 days. At the conference of the foreign ministry, Langman and the naval attaché put their case to Dr. Guiani as strongly as they could, and it was finally agreed with him that the Uruguayan Technical Commission should inspect the ship late that afternoon to determine what repairs were needed. So at 1900 hours, a Uruguayan Navy commander and an engineer officer arrived on board and were shown around by Klepp. They agreed some repairs were necessary to make the ship seaworthy, but no amount of questioning by the Germans would get them to say how long they considered should be required. They had first to report to their superior officers, they explained. Thus, in a way hardly satisfactory to the Germans, the Graf Spee's first day in Montevideo ended. In Berlin, Grand Admiral Raeder had received the brief radio report from Captain Langsdorff, describing the damage and its immediate intentions, and with Ribbentrop, the German foreign minister, was anxiously awaiting cable from Dr. Langman giving Uruguay's decision on the time to be allowed. In Whitehall that day, the Admiralty had been working closely with the Foreign Office. All available warships were, as described earlier, steaming to Commodore Harwood's assistance. Now it was up to the diplomats to do their juggling. Ideally, the Admiralty would have liked to see the Graf Spee interned, but failing that, they wanted her to be allowed to stay for 4 or 5 days until the British reinforcements arrived off the plate. But it was vitally important that the Germans should not guess that. Otherwise, as soon as the Graf Spee realized that there was still only the Ajax and Achilles waiting for outside, she might well make a dash for it and sink both the cruisers before escaping. There were, therefore, 3 things to be done. The first one was to kick up a fuss in Montevideo and request the Graf Spee should not be allowed to stay for more than 24 hours, thus making it appear the British were anxious for the Graf Spee to sail as soon as possible. The Germans would naturally assume the British had several warships just over the horizon, waiting to fall on the pocket battleship with vicious enthusiasm. The second was to plant stories that the British Navy heavy warships were in fact already in position, and the third was to make sure the Graf Spee, despite Britain's apparently sincere and stern protests, did not sail. As Commodore Harwood had already suggested, This can be done for a few days by sailing British merchant ships and claiming 24 hours grace. Instructions were cabled to Mr. E. Millington Drake, the British minister in Montevideo, and the following signal was sent to Commodore Harwood in the Ajax and to Admiral Lyon in Freetown. Foreign Office have instructed HM Minister Montevideo to use every endeavour to get Spey interned. Arguments to be used are A. If the ship is seaworthy, Hague Convention does not permit repairs, and she must leave after 24 hours or be interned. B. If she is not seaworthy, same is true, as there is wide support for the view that no shore facilities or extension of time may be granted for repairs and damage sustained in action. Foreign Office have added to the Minister's own information that if Uruguayan authorities will not accept these arguments, we should prefer that the ship remains 4 or 5 days. Meanwhile, the Ajax and Achilles continued on guard during the day and night of the 14th December. The Commodore received various signals telling him when it was anticipated reinforcements would arrive. The Cumberland joined him at 2200 hours after a dash from the Falkland Islands, and he ordered her to cover the south between Rowan Bank and English Bank, with Achilles to the north of her and Ajax to the south. Should Graf Spey come out, he wrote later, she was to be shadowed, and all ships were to concentrate sufficiently far to seaward to enable a concerted attack to be carried out. That night, after dark, Captain Parry decided to take the Achilles right in close, and he found it was possible to see anything moving in the entrance silhouetted against the lights of the town. However, the Commodore said they must not commit any warlike act so close in, although it was outside the 3-mile limit, which was the only formal territorial waters which Britain recognised. Argentina and Uruguay between them claimed the whole Plate estuary. This is a good account of it. A very good account. That's good. There's always truth, and the truth in the final report. Yep. Exeter kept beating up on my Hawkins last night. It wasn't fun. He was working with Graf Spey, as we'll talk about. Irony. That's cruel. Then for an 8-inch shell subcaliber Sabo. Neil Woodham, Crazy Looker, don't forget that during the invasion scare of the spring of 1441, there were divisions being sent out to Africa and other peripheral theatres. Yeah. One of the things you always have to remember, Britain was scared of being invaded, but was also sending out divisions to other parts of the empire. Let's see. I think Crazy Looker. Also, this is going to sound terrible for a naval historian to say, but sometimes some parts of the World War II are over-egged. The one I love to always say is that the never known to be short of amateur dramatics, Churchill, of course, says that, the only thing that kept him up at nights was the Battle of the Atlantic. Yeah, but with most of the enigma, and especially not the description, but the data, the traffic analysis and the signal analysis and where that's coming from, and the growth in escort numbers, especially the growth in corvettes and sloops numbers, and then frigates. It's one of those things. The Battle of the Atlantic is vicious, and there are certainly points where the Allies and the British are not winning it enough. But there are no points at which I would say they were completely losing it. In that, at no point is more stuff getting sunk than is getting through. Yes, there are critical supplies which don't get through as quickly as they would have liked them to get through. And yes, a lot of money is on the bottom of the North Atlantic because of both world wars. But, and we have to be careful about saying this, but we can be careful about it. We can say this in reasonable levels of caution. It's not as cut. It's never a scenario where you look at the stats and you go, yeah, there are points at which it comes close to being something which could be really, really problematic and worrying. And so that's why you're getting worried, because this has a potential if this carries on in this trajectory. But it never really managed to achieve that. And the real thing is, because honestly, when we're talking about German submarines, we often focus in on the most capable submarines. And the fact is, the vast majority of them weren't them. And also, you have a thing that by the time they have enough submarines, quite a lot of their very good crews from the beginning of World War II, the peacetime trained crews, aren't around anymore. They're either broken up or they've been sunk. So you have a scenario that you have your really most skilled people available when you have your fewest ships, and then you have your less skilled people available when you have your most boats. So, yeah. And the thing is, doing a Wolfpack tactics really does require skilled submariners. Don Golding, the River Plate reads like an account from much older, more civilized sort of war, especially in comparison to how the war progressed. So, did the Germans ever claim their armour was so strong it whittled down the 8-inch round to a 6-inch hull? I wouldn't be surprised. With Cumberland present and limited manoeuvre being leaving the plate, the grass bay would have been in trouble anyway, as probably only front turret would have been usable while coming out. Oh, yes, and you must remember, Cumberland is an upgraded, full-sized, very pissed off county class heavy cruiser. Sorry. And she would do the full damage. It's not like Exeter, where you're dealing with a slowed down, one turret less Type B county class. No, you're dealing with a full-on county that would go, hello. Yeah, I see you. Those extra 2 8-inch guns would make a bit impact. Re-World War II risk from Battle of the Atlantic U-boat campaign. I see it as a risk as risking breaking British morale as the blockade did on Germany late World War I, rather than truly starving Britain. Especially once you have Dig for Victory and various other things going on. The viability of... And also, you have quite a large amount of Britain's population is shifted around the world, fighting in armies, fighting around the world, getting food supplies from different parts of the world. So it's an interesting scenario. Strub, Doctor, how did RN and USN deal with the wartime untrained crew do so much better than their peacetime trained crews? A flip of German experience. We see... Okay, the wartime trained crews in Britain, etc., and USN, they don't necessarily do better, but what they do have is that they are starting from a far larger trained base anyway, and so most crews are not made up of, are usually hybrids. So if you consider the RN starts off with the regular service personnel, the Royal Naval Reserve, the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve. So R&R is mostly, at this period, mostly people who have formerly served in the Navy. Volunteer Reserve are what, like we'd understand, modern reservists. And that's their trained strength. And then they have people that volunteer for service in wartime service only. And so they have these three large groups of people to form as their trainers, to form the core of their crews, and all these things. So it makes a difference how quickly you can expand your forces. The big problem for Japan, especially in World War II, is the way they train their air crews. In that, when you have successful air crew on British or American carriers, they do go out and do a couple of tours of duty. They do it on board an aircraft carrier. Then they get called back to train people, or they get a shore role where they're training people. So the people who are trained up get the benefit of having experience provided by someone who served. We talk about the very short pilot. I've got this book not that far away from me, have I? Oh, good lord. Where did I put it? Oh, blooming. Where did I put his book? Short Scottish Pilot. Short Scottish Pilot. Naval Wings. Is that it down there? Naval Wings. Yes, Wings Navy. Eric Winkle Brown. The thing is, Winkle Brown goes off and does a tour of duty on a escort carrier, gets his service, and then goes and becomes a test pilot. So basically, instead of keep sending, this person's really good, I'm going to keep sending them out and sending them out, the British go, and the Americans tend to go, this person's really good, they've got some good experience, okay, we'll get them in for training other people. So it's a different way of personnel management, honestly. Landfreeman, re-Battle of Report. With Grass Bay coming out, worth risking accidentally torpedoing the shore to put one or two into German ship? Oh, yes. But in the nicest way, HMS Achilles was actually getting in position to do it on the night of the 14th. If they thought they could have got away with it, I think they would have fired some torpedoes at that night into the sitting duck that is Grass Bay. That's good. I always thought that the ploy of ordering berthing and fuel for a number of capital ships in Buenos Aires, using codes, was an inspired piece of description. It was Rio de Janeiro, but yeah, it was. Buenos Aires would have been past it. Rio was on the way to it. The thing is, if so. From having a wee read, the Prince of Wales to Singapore move featured a prominent stop at Cape Town, the start of the Deterence mission. Oh, yes. Hello, Newhouse S, and IR stream. This is like my jam. Oh, cool. Danrim, did the RN and other services use overage World War I veterans not in uniform to aid technical training act? Yes. It doesn't. Fact. I think you're talking about the American one, but again, another one, he goes off and starts doing teacher flying, training pilots, and then he goes to command a wing, and eventually he ends up as someone as a sort of second in command on an aircraft carrier, I think in command of an aircraft carrier, and does a few other things as well. Nauru. My grandfather-in-law was a farm boy who worked on the farm tractor because you had to. He is drafted and they sent him to learn how to work on aircraft engines. That also helps. Adam Clinton, anyway, you park a battleship as part of a deterrence mission. Yes, imagine if that battleship had come with an aircraft carrying deterrence. Jermac, running aces and cadre to their limits and then more, using professional instructors as transport pilots, and more Luftwaffe sins. Basically, the Luftwaffe wasn't really set up for a long war. Brandon, new hazard. I don't think you were here for this when I announced it, so I'll say it again. What we're doing is go to the description. When I say new book, or next book, you go to the description, and of the first 5 responses that come through, the one which has the majority or comes first is the one I next read. So the ones which have got numbers by them, they've already been done. So we now, I think, have 13 books remaining. So, next book. What will be the next book people would like me to read from? Gadrin, was Axis power set up for long war? The only one which is actually remarkably close to being set up for a long war is actually the Italians. They're the closest to being set up for a long war. Well, the time next to the river plate isn't showing. Oh, that's annoying. Let me check that. Global economy seems to be the one that's winning. Re-Orient. Global economy in Asia by Andre Frank. That got 2 out of the first 3. Let's see. Diplomat duty, naval future. Yeah. Sorry. Andre Frank. Re-Orient. Global economy in Asian age. Andre Gunnar Frank is what one. It's a good book. So, okay. So, I picked a chapter, but USS. That's an innovative idea. Look, unfortunately, I'm building a fence line, so I'm listening only. No transmit. That's a shame. But we'll have to figure this one out. Okay, I will give you a start at this book includes such chapters as horizontally integrative macro history. So it's one of those books, and it is fun to read, but you do sometimes think you need a complete and utter new dictionary to understand it. Comparing and relating Asian and European institutions. The final section of this chapter neither attempts nor pretends to be a history or even a survey of financial and commercial institutions. I wish to address the question, or rather the common presumption, that such institutional development was more advanced in Europe than elsewhere, that Europe exported its institutions, and that others ultimately had to and did adopt them as well. That is the message of almost the entire European Western historiography and social theory, or rather assumption, regarding this matter. They reach at least from Marx and Weber and Western economic historians to social scientists and publicists still following this line today. Much of what has been written has been based on pure ignorance and or prejudice about conditions outside Europe or on hearsay. Despite Weber's many studies of religion, society, and institutions in Europe and Asia, such earlier authorities have been the basis largely for the authority of later and contemporary observers. Hardly any of them have taken the trouble to look for themselves, or even to ask themselves whether the received theory is or could be plausible in the face of other generally known evidence, which it cannot. Alas, the direct evidence about these institutions outside Europe is fragmentary, and there are relatively few historians and social theorists who have even troubled to look at what there is. Nonetheless, a number of Asian historians offer evidence of institutional organization, mostly as a background or aside to their studies of economic events. I have cited them extensively elsewhere in this book, and we may usefully call upon their testimony regarding institutions that made them possible. A few other, mostly Western historians, of a more general perspective, have sought to construct some inductive summaries based on these studies as well as their own experience. However, they in turn also bring their Western Eurocentric perspective with them and seek to overcome it only to varying degree. I refer principally to Van Leur in 1955, Stensgaard 1972 and 1990, Brondel in 1979 and 1992, Mark Elvin 1973 on China, and later especially Perlin 1990, 1933 and 93 and 1994, who does reject Eurocentrism entirely. The argument below will appeal to their authority. An exhaustive or even fragmentary survey of the institutional landscape is now beyond my scope and capacity. However, the received Eurocentric institutional accounts and theories also rely extensively on the authority of testimony, alas often false testimony. My selection, too, will be frankly partisan, for I will argue if the productive and commercial structure and process really was as evidence reviewed elsewhere in this book shows, they must ask what kind of institutional organization could or must have existed to make that possible. Pursuing this task, therefore, involves posing the following questions, and seeking answers to them, among others. What economic, productive, commercial, trade, and financial activity was there? This entire book is an attempt to outline and summarize that activity. What kind of financial, commercial, and other economic and political or social institutions here and there made that possible? We will cite some of the evidence, appealing mostly to authority. What is the history of these institutions, and especially were they endogenous, or at least already long pre-existing in this or that region? In answer, we will and can advance circumstantial evidence at best. How do these institutions compare between here and there? In answer, we will appeal both to authority and to if-then arguments of plausibility. Now, there are times when I will find some modern histories which are just seeking, in my mind, to judge the past by the standards of today. I will find them annoying and I will bring them off on that. But there are times when you find history books which, like I do with some parts of naval history, where people are basically going, well, the traditional narrative that's taught ignores what's basically straight in front of your face. Have you looked at this? And that's what this book is. This book is about basically going, okay, so we know there's an incredibly complicated economy going on at the other end of the Silk Road. And we know there's an incredibly complicated economy going on in Europe. We know there's a fairly complicated economy going on in between those places as well. On what grounds can we presume, therefore, that the people at one end of the road do not have as advanced an economic structures for their time as the people at the other end of the road. What's your basis for such an analysis? It's twaddle. King's Rook, here's chapter's title. Here's what? Yes, well, the chapters are fun in this book. Let's see. There's, of course, horizontally integrative macro history. The chapter I was reading from is chapter 4, Global Economy, Comparisons and Relations. Technically, it's Mechanism, Economic and Financial Institutions, which is, again, part of Quantities, Population, Productivity, Income, and Trade. You also have Simultaneity is no coincidence, and doing horizontal integrative macro history. And challenging and reformulating the explanation, and commonality, similarity versus specificity and differences. Yeah, basically, if you are interested in economic history of the world and how it affects international relations, this book is a really good book to have. But it is a book which is not for the general reader. It's far too openly complex in terms of its language, in that it's gone down the rabbit hole. So, if you consider that this book can be read by anyone and everyone, it's designed as a general history for everyone to read. This book is designed as something which someone who's already read probably a book on economic theory can go through, because it uses terminology as a base point which you need to understand. So it's using economic theory terminology. You need to understand that theory, or you need to be prepared to spend a lot of time Googling as you go through the book. It's a good book, though. Devscott, welcome to the final year of economic sections of my degree. No comment. Sounds like an academic paper slipped into the book. Quite a few did in this one. Let's figure out. Good morning. Hello. Nothing like getting back to office and seeing streaming now to make the last hour of the night shift great. I'm glad that's helpful. Calvin Gasway. Asian and European economic institutions. Misquoting Pratchett. China had several words for embezzlement when Europeans discovered hen theft. Yeah. Donagama, this is popular economics. You can tell because it's prose rather than equations. I just carefully picked the chapter which didn't have the equations in it. There is actually chapters which have... Well, want a full-on plan, anyone? Economic equations, national equations. Yeah. But it is a good book. Carl tomato soup and fresh bread, nothing better. Yes, I'll make you hungry. So, speaking of hungry, my workmates did a number on this week's baking session. Triple batch of cinnamon and walnut tea cakes. Double batch of strawberry coconut slice. Whole lot consumed by end of shift. Good for you. Any views on where history ends and IR theory starts? Well, history ends tonight and IR theory starts tomorrow. That's it. to me, by the time you hear these words, that's history, because there's a delay. IR theory is about tomorrow. And IR theory is based in our understanding of what people have done in history. So you can say neither ever end or start, really. It's fun. Dope Squad. At some point, it was thought that people outside the top 10% economically should be able to read and write. Well, yes and no. I would say, honestly, linguistics changes. And that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's when you start losing parts of your language that you have to worry. In that, well, you see, when I went to school, I would talk like this the whole time because I was a scholarship boy at a private school. So one learned how to talk properly and to talk very eloquently, but also to sound really kind of like this. And if I walk into a club in London or various other places, I will start talking like this because this is how I was raised to talk in those scenarios. It's not my normal accent. It's not how I normally talk. That's how I talk when I talk on the videos normally. But this is my This is my accent for those scenarios. And many people, when they hear this, would think this is sort of very toffee nose British, very upper crust. Actually, it's not. It's not nearly plummy enough. It's merely sort of maybe upper middle class, really, rather than upper class in terms of linguistics. For upper class, you have to start going down a bit more plummier route, and you have to start really dragging the tums and start talking like this. And well, I can keep this up. You know, I have grown up in that sort of world that I can keep this up all day without dropping a beat. I can keep it up constantly. And I can talk about the eloquent phraseology of the metallurgy and the metaphoric discussion of the phrase of the linking between the divine melodies and all sorts of stuff. I can use beautiful words all day and never make a single jot of sense. But that isn't how I normally talk. So, you know, this is my normal voice. Imperial American, hello. Good thing I only spend half my time reading or triple checking what every third sentence means. Carmen, what's IR theory? What is IR theory? International relations theory. The idea of what the future is going to be and how you do relations between nations. Consequence, I'm not optimistic on the so-called revisionist Asian history for the time being. I wouldn't call Re-Orient actually revisionist. I would call Re-Orient more a case of balancing. Certainly, it's a quality. It's a very, very factual-led one. New House S. History ended in 1990. Francis Fukuyama told me. Well, I'm sure it did. Every day in 1990, history ended. The trouble is, every day, it's also ended every day in since. Tom Gunning. Fellow Celt who adopted an RP accent to avoid being bullied in an English boarding school. No, I didn't have to go to a boarding school. It was what's called a day school. I was a day boarder. That's what it's termed when you go to a public school in the UK. And it's a very nice one. It's a lovely one. It's called Youghal Castle. I went there from the age of 11 to 18. It's a lovely school. As I said, had a scholarship, and it was, you know, this is how you talked. This is what you talked like. You just learn to use it. Kingsrook, I prefer normal voice. Sounds more natural. It does. But that's just not how you talk in those scenarios. It's amazing fun is that when the boys, because it was an all-boys school when I went there, it's now mixed and got girls in it as well. Most of the large chunk of the boys, when they got out of school, would suddenly start talking differently. Gross asking, upper class is saying snoo instead of snow. Yeah. Well, you see, Denna's my girlfriend, who would go, well, I would say castle, because that's how you say it down here. But she would say castle. So she would say Newcastle, and Newcastle, and I would say Newcastle. So there's not just the posh, sort of the growing of posh accents and the going up and down classes. There's also the regional accents which factor into it. It's quite fun. Carmen, I believe that's what you call the I know what I'm talking about and want you to understand, and the I really know what I'm talking about and want you to completely confuse you accent. Yeah. Jerk, fun thing, when I once listened to Bruships during a long car ride, the person with whom I rode firstly noticed he have a nice accent. Thank you. Imperium accurate, by definition, is revisionist instead of revising the traditional narrative. Yes, but to a historian like me, there is a revisionist and there is revisionist. In that there are the ones who there is the historians who are revising things purely from the perspective that everything has to be revised to make one side look better than the other side to counterbalance the traditional narrative, and there's the ones who are just going, actually, no one has actually done a proper study in this, so here you go. Here's a proper study, which is what the tact which Andre Frank is taking. Calvin Gaswood reminds me for when I told some some native English speakers that plural for a child is not childs but children. I'm going to tell them that plane and the plural for aircraft is aircraft. That aircrafts does not exist unless you're doing craft in the air. Jack Hunter. Wait, did Dr. Clark say he went to a private school in Newcastle, Kings Priory, or RGS? I went to Ewell Castle. Ewell Castle. I remember doing a talk on Scouts in front of the Rotary Club and several other well-off groups and having to completely alter my speech. Nick Waters, and the Geordies will laugh at both. Oh, yes, they would. They do it, actually. They've got our theory is a framework on to which to place the actions of both national governments and individuals in exchange between different nation states and other governed areas. Yeah. It's also where they start to introduce a phrase called game theory sometimes, which just worries me a bit. Because I realise where it's come from, and I realise the mathematical world it belongs to. But I also don't like the idea of anyone sort of considering international relations a game. That suggests points and rules and a referee, none of which exist in international relations. Alistair Crone, now I want to put a dock in Outback Australia for a couple of years so his accent becomes mid-Indian Ocean. Wait if I ever do one of these from Cornwall. Then you will have a Cornish accent to deal with. Carmen, I believe you'll find your girlfriend's pronunciation is correct. Well, in as much as normal here. Shh! Don't tell her. You're right, but don't tell her. Imperium American. Yes, historical revision is either really good or really bad. There's pretty much no middle ground. Yeah, usually I call it when it's good, just history. It's good history, and that's what this is really in many ways. Even though it calls itself economic, sort of economic history. I call it revisionist when it's bad. Tom Godding, fairly sure I played rugby against him at one point. Probably wasn't my team. My team tended to get called in for an our-day rugby team when our A team lost. Then they'd send basically the guys who didn't play rugby in terms of weren't considering it their next future career, but were the ones who, when they did play rugby, had a habit of winning because they were very good at creative interpretation of the rules and distraction of the referee at appropriate moments. And we're also all fairly big. Death Squad, if you don't like the idea of practitioners of IR thinking they're in some kind of game, I fully agree with you. But I also have some bad news for you. Yeah, I know what the bad news is. Gahedron, you were the goons. Technically, we were called the Duffers, but yes, the goons, basically. In the full spirit of that particular movie, which I have to say, I love that movie. Goon movie is one of the coolest movies I ever watched. It's one completely insane, but you can just watch it and just enjoy it, and you don't have to question anything in it. You just go, it's hockey, ice hockey from a certain area. It makes sense. I haven't yet shown it to my girlfriend though. I should show a Goon. It's an experience. Tom Gunning, no offense meant in the world Dot Club, but it might have been 5 years after your time. Sounds like a fine bunch of chapters. Yes, probably was. They're a fun group. Dylan, creative interpretation rules. If ever there was a phrase that defines Britain, it is that. Yeah. Well, we found out water works as armor. Right then, so we'll go wandering off well and truly off the topic. So I'll say next book. Death Squad, I think the worst bit of modern IR practice is deduction somewhere along the line of the concept of zero-sum game. Therefore, to win, the other player has to lose. Oh, yeah. Jack Hunter, Goon is awesome. Goon laughs the enforcers need killing with fire. Yeah, I would possibly agree with that. Statecraft has taken an early lead. Let's see, we've had 4 responses so far. Naval Future. Yep, Statecraft has won. 2 votes. Seems to be they get the 2 of 5. It's a 40% response, tends to be. Statecraft, Margaret Thatcher. 149. Carmen, is it Ocean College that's in South Wales by Pontypridd? I think you might be right. I'm not sure, though. My knowledge of colleges in South Wales is not 100% there. Indonesia, a man-made mess. Before the 1997 economic crisis, one could have listed Indonesia alongside its tiny neighbour Singapore as a man-made miracle. And politically incorrect as it may now be to say so, the main architect of all this was undoubtedly ex-President Suharto. It was Suharto who in 1967, at the head of the army and with considerable popular support, put an end to the economic chaos which the anti-capitalist and anti-Western policies of the then President Sukarno had generated. President Suharto's policies of opening up the country to Western investment and promoting modernization and private enterprise turned Indonesia from a sloth into a tiger, with growth running at 7% a year between 1985 and 1995. Mr. Suharto succeeded in bringing about a marked improvement in the country's general living standards, cutting the proportion of the population living in poverty from 60% to just 11%. And that's according to the World Bank and Indonesia, the World Bank Group 2000. Revolution 2000. It is true that there was bloodshed and repression, but it's also true the country faced a communist revolution. And whether victorious or defeated, communist revolutions generally entail the shedding of blood in abundance. Moreover, although it is sometimes forgotten, the circumstances of Indonesia's annexation of Portugal's former colony of East Timor in 1975 were not dissimilar. A vicious civil war was underway, and a communist-backed faction seemed about to take over. I feel no need to justify all the actions of the Suharto government. I also think that President Suharto would have been wise to step down some years earlier than he did. But there is still something rather nauseating about watching Western countries, which were anxious to back him when he was useful, now parrot the slogans of human rights activists without acknowledging the immense practical benefits which his government brought to the country and indeed to us in the West. I talked with President Suharto on a number of occasions before and after leaving office. Last time was in 1992, when he took me to visit his stock breeding farm at Tapus. Like many Indonesians, he was almost obsessively interested in agriculture, and wanted to ensure that the rural way of life benefited from scientific and technological advance to check the stabilizing flow of population to the cities. I am perfectly prepared to believe that Mr. Suharto and his family exploited their position financially, as is not unusual amongst autocrats, but I am equally convinced that he wanted the best for Indonesia. And on any objective criteria, his rule must be judged a success. These reflections on the Suharto regime are of some practical relevance now. Although the threat of communist subversion in Southeast Asia as elsewhere has been lifted, the other threat with which Suharto had to cope has not, and that is the threat of disintegration of the Indonesian state. In their anxiety to dislodge him, the IMF used the economic crisis that struck Indonesia in 1987 to set terms which they must have known he could not meet and survive. The IMF rescue became, in short, a political rather than a financial operation. In particular, the fund insisted on huge increases in fuel and food prices at a time when ordinary Indonesians had already seen their living standards plunge as a result of devaluation. These changes, some of which were doubtless in themselves desirable, were, when imposed in these circumstances, enormously disruptive, and they destabilized not just the government, but the country as a whole. I'm reminded of Ambassador Kirkpatrick's observations regarding the idea that it's possible to democratize governments anytime, anywhere, under any circumstances. In traditional autocracies, the fabric of authority unravels quickly when the power and status of the man at the top are undermined or unlimited. The longer the autocrat has held power and the more pervasive his personal influence, the more dependent a nation's institutions will be on him. Without him, the organized life of the society will collapse, like an arch from which the keystone has been removed. And this is what happened in Indonesia. Despite the best efforts of President Suharto's ally and successor, B.J. Habibie, the chaos then worsened sharply under Abraham Wahid until his removal, and it remains to be seen how new President Megawati Soekarno-Putri will cope with it. I'm not a believer in the West intervening to prevent the break of our states, where the concerned peoples demand it, and where sensible options are available. But neither should the West promote such political dissolution by contriving to create a breakdown in central authority, particularly when that puts the West's own interests at stake. Indonesia is a huge country, a state of over 200 million people speaking 250 languages and inhabiting 6,000 islands, stretching across a third of the Earth's circumference. Throughout its existence as an independent country, the authority's overriding concern has been to bolster national unity. That, for example, is the purpose of the 5 principles of Pancasila, incorporated in the Constitution to provide Indonesia's governing philosophy, one of religious inclusiveness and mutual respect. And the importance of such concepts has been shown by the massacres that have been taking place of Christians in the Moluccas and of the Madris and Kalimantan, Indonesian Borneo, since President Suharto disappeared from the scene. It remains to be seen whether Indonesia in its present form will survive. It was right that East Timor should have been allowed its independence, though whether the inhabitants of that poverty-stricken community will ever eventually think their struggle against Jakarta worthwhile remains to be seen. But it is clear that substantial minorities, perhaps even majorities, in other parts of Indonesia are now tempted to follow suit. Strongly Islamic source of 40% of the liquefied natural gas that is one of Indonesia's main import and exports, is demanding autonomy and may try to secede. There are similar, though weaker, movements in Papua, Riau, and East Kalimantan, all of which are also rich in natural resources. Fierce resentment of the small but rich and powerful Chinese community of Jakarta, which has led to murderous riots, also threatens the basis of the Indonesian state. It is in the West's interest that Indonesia should remain broadly intact and that it should become an orderly, prosperous power once again. We should remember that 2/5 of the world's shipping passes through this far-flung archipelago. Nor must it be overlooked that as the world's largest Muslim state, Indonesia has a still wider significance in the extraordinarily delicate and important matter of managing the West's global relations with Islam. If Indonesia can evolve into a successfully democratic Muslim country, that will provide a welcome example to the rest of the Muslim world. So it seems to me that Western attitudes to Indonesia have been ill-advised and short-sighted. We should resist the temptation to try to sweep away unsatisfactory regimes like Suharto's without thought for the consequences. Insofar as it lies within our power, we should now try to see that Indonesia survives and flourishes. It's one of those interesting things. Every single chapter, section about it, and everything has, after their country, little bullet points of what Margaret Thatcher thinks. It's basically her guide to global relations. And it's really, really clever. And it's worthwhile reading. Great, Statecraft sounds interesting. Yeah. Nick Waters, Thatcher's, as Spitting Image put it, Margaret Hilda Belgrano politics screaming Lady Thatcher. Crazy Locker, boy, is that chapter permanent right now. Yes, it is worth reading. And you have to remember, whilst Lady Thatcher is a Marmite figure, and various people are happy to lampoon her, be careful with reading too much into the Marmiteness. In that, what I always remember from my days at university and having a chat with colleagues who were not history students, it's about a third of them didn't really seem to know much about her other than she'd been a Tory. A third were pro her because she had been a Tory, a Conservative, and a third were anti her because she'd been a Conservative. And you sit there and go, it's a thriving democracy. There are people of strong opinions and they're allowed to express them. Let them. Basically, she said it's only 1 million communists and bystanders who died. More she's saying, and I think this is the thing, she's not actually excusing what he's doing, but she's saying that, come on, you know, you're in all these Western nations currently going, yeah, he was terrible, he's terrible. You were ringleading and supporting him doing it. And you didn't have any better options at the time. So now you're slamming him, it's kind of a bit two-faced. Adam Flynn, UK and US are world champions of debt trap diplomacy. Ergo dominance of London and New York with finance. I would say there is definitely a rising power when it comes to depth trap diplomacy going on. Has anyone ever realised with the whole United Kingdom and the forming of England and Scotland is that it was a Scottish king who became king of England? So technically, it was a Scottish takeover of England. I just like to point out the Act of Union, etc. It's technically a Scottish king becoming king of England. It's technically the House of Stuart. That might shock people, but it is. It's a Scottish king taking over England, which they've been trying for a long time to do. Grossowski, I would agree with that. Maggie was, to an way, at least you knew where she stood, or whether she stood what you supported or not. And she was smart. You did know she... That's the one thing. There are many people who will talk about Margaret Thatcher in a very derogatory way, but almost no one will ever try and portray the word that she was stupid. Or she didn't have a reason for it. You might disagree with her reasons, you might disagree with her logic. But if you sit there and try and start calling her dumb, you are on a hiding to nothing. Tom Godding. I don't agree with everything she did or the way it was done, but it's hard to deny that she was a prime minister of quality we haven't seen since. Yeah, I would argue that honestly, when I look back, she's the last prime minister we had who actually had a long-term plan about anything. And that means look back at the prime ministers we've had; they've had good or bad points, all of them, but I'm not sure any of them have had a long-term plan. You know what'll never let history stand in the way of good grouse. I know. But this is the thing. There's a reason I drink iron brew. You know, there is the family history on the subject. Well, James the Sixth first became king. He kept two separate kingdoms. It wasn't a union for about a century, and that was after the South Sea bubble collapsed. Yeah, but it was still a Scottish Charles king. If you consider, I think it was under Charlie Boy number 2 or Charlie Boy or James. Yeah, it's Charlie Boy number 2. I think he comes on, who is still a Stuart. Common, long-term plan for everything bar and coal mine closing. Well, to be honest, if you consider the way that the coal industry's gone, we don't have steam trains anymore. We've cut coal. We have steam trains, but they are heritage railways. They're not national. They're not on the main line. Much as some of us would like them on the main line, they're not on the main line anymore. And we don't. The coal power stations are shutting down. What was the long-term future for coal? That sounds terrible to say. That is horrible to say in many ways. But there's also a thing, and there's no long-term plan for coal because there is no long-term plan for how you're going to use coal. Until someone comes up with actually a viable way of making clean coal work in a way which is going to make people open up coal power stations again, which I doubt anyone is going to assume, because I don't see many British or European or even Japanese, etc. economies deciding to charge into coal power stations. China is, and Africa is, but not many other places. Don't tell me you're a significant shareholder of Iron Brew. I wish. If I had that much money, I would be a shareholder. Actually, no, honestly, there are 3 companies I would have shares in if I had the money. Google, of course. Amazon, obvious reasons why, and Bar, which makes Iron Brew. If I had 4th, it would be SpaceX, because if we are going to end up on Mars, I would prefer to have enough of interest in the company that I don't end up as one of Elon Musk's slave laborers. Discord, modern politics is short-termist politics. If it happens after the end of your term, it's not your problem. If it's paid for after the end of after the end of your term, you don't have to pay for it. Yeah. Decision, you could likely argue she was the last UK PM to not come from a very particular educational background, without her fear of difference, without fear of difference to the UK press. John Major didn't come from that educational background, but he certainly did have fear and deference for the UK press. Come on, I never said it was wrong to order close them. I mean the no employment to replace it. Well, that's again one of the issues. It's working out what was the employment going to be. And I often think that in that sense, they overestimated how quickly capital regeneration would take place. The Acts of Union was 1706 to 17 under Queen Anne. But she was a Stuart. Yeah. I think she was the last Stuart to be followed by some Germans from called George. Yes, she was. Because she was the younger sister of Mary, who was the eldest daughter of James the Second. But I don't know why I thought it was under Charles II, so I thought it was under her uncle. Pete Dawson. 60163 tornadoes sometimes on the mainland. Yes. Sorry for me being very Pacific 462. Yes, she is, and there's also some of the princesses sometimes get on the main line. And I think there's a castle class which goes on the main line occasionally. Even China is moving away from coal. Not making it cleaner. They're moving away from it slowly. Yes, they are. No. And Flynn, Scarborough still has a turntable, water tank, and coaling, mostly because the Rail Museum runs its trains there. Cool! Right. Let's go for another book, shall we? Next book, please. Scott, there was an element of concentrating on top-level statistics with regionalism and Thatcherism. If GDP goes up, the country is doing well. Therefore, regional GDP is less important. Yep. So we have these two. Dreadnought, Naval Future, Monarchs, Dreadnought. I think I have to go Dreadnought, even though technically it and Naval Future actually managed to tie. There were then a succession of Dreadnoughts in 6, 7, and fair number runs down from that. So, honestly, I would argue Dreadnought is a great book about the failure of diplomacy on both sides. Germany didn't want a war with Britain. They wanted Britain to grant her a place in the world as a peer. They didn't realise what they were doing. Salisbury's resignation as Foreign Secretary raised Joseph Chamberlain to an even higher level of importance. Winston Churchill, first elected to the House of Commons in the Khaki election, later recalled his own contemporary view of the Colonial Secretary. At a time when I looked out on my regimental cradle and was thrilled by politics, Mr. Chamberlain was incomparably the most live, sparkling, insurgent, compulsive figure in British affairs. Above him in the House of Lords reigned venerable, august Lord Salisbury, Prime Minister since God knew when. Besides him, on the government bench, wise, cautious, polished, comprehending, airily fearless, Arthur Balfour led the House of Commons. But Joe was the one who made the weather. He was the man the masses knew. He it was who had solutions for social problems, who was ready to advance, sword in hand if need be, upon the foes of Britain, and whose accents rang in the ears of all the young people to the Empire and lots of young people at its heart. Lansdowne now was Foreign Secretary, but Chamberlain took charge of renewing the alliance proposal to Germany. Again, he made the initial proposal to Eckenstein. The German diplomat had a powerful ally in London society in Louise, Duchess of Devonshire. The Duchess was German, born Countess Sultan of Hanover. Devonshire was in fact her second English duke. She had first come to England as the bride of the Duke of Manchester, and while still a young wife, had become the mistress of the future Duke of Devonshire, then titled Lord Hartington. The discreet liaison continued for 24 years until Manchester died, leaving Louise free to marry Devonshire. London promptly dubbed her the Double Duchess. Attached to both the country of her birth and the country of her marriages, she did all she could to assist Eckenstein in dealing with Chamberlain and the cabinet. On January the 9th, 1901, Eckenstein and his wife received an invitation to a house party at Chatsworth. "Pray come without fail, as the Duke has several urgent political questions to discuss with you," the Duchess wrote. "Joseph Chamberlain will also be there. As we shall have a large party of about 50 guests, you will easily get a chance for a quiet talk with the Duke and Joseph, without attracting any notice. It is true, Asquith, the Liberal leader, Henry Herbert Asquith, and some other leading members of the opposition will be there with us too, but that will not matter, for there are in the Schloss plenty of rooms where you will be able to talk without being noticed by anyone." When Eckenstein arrived at Chatsworth, the holiday season was at its height. Prince of Wales and Arthur Balfour had left, but Mrs. Keppel was still there, and amateur theatricals were presented every night. The conversation between Chamberlain, Eckenstein, and the Duke of Devonshire took place in the Duke's library after dinner on January 16th. Eckenstein returned to London the next day and assisted Count Hazelhurst in drawing up a telegram to Berlin. Despite his early disappointment, Chamberlain's long-term aim remained to the adherence of Britain to the Triple Alliance. The colonial minister and his friends had made up their minds that the day of the splendidization was over for England, and the telegram, England must look for allies for the future. The choice is either Russia or France or the Triple Alliance. He, Chamberlain, was convinced that a combination with Germany and an association with the Triple Alliance was preferable. His advice was that matters should be taken up as soon as Lord Salisbury left for the south, and the details should be negotiated with Lord Lansdowne and himself. So long as he is convinced that a lasting partnership with Germany is possible, he was resistant to the utmost the idea of an arrangement with Russia. Nevertheless, should it become evident that a permanent junction with Germany is not practical, then he too would advocate a settlement with Russia. Later that day, Hatzfeld dispatched to Holstein a private message, making more explicit his and Eckstein's impression that senior members of the British cabinet were now preparing to deliberately circumvent the Prime Minister. It is particularly noteworthy that Chamberlain almost undisguisedly expresses the hope that he will soon be rid of Salisbury, and therefore become master of the situation. It seems certain that Salisbury is leaving for the south for several months, and that then Chamberlain and his friends, on whom Lansdowne is very much one, will be in control here. Chamberlain's new overture was received in Berlin with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. You and I are entirely in agreement that the idea of the alliance is premature. Hatzfeldt had begun his message to Holstein, knowing how Chamberlain's ideas were viewed in the Wilhelmstrasse. The German view continued to be that Germany could afford to wait. As time passed and Britain's difficulties increased, she would pay more for the security of a German alliance. Better wait and leave the initiative to the English, Bullell telegraphed to Hatzfeldt on January 20th. There is no hurry. I don't believe in an agreement between England and the dual alliance, France and Russia, until England has lost all hope of Germany's eventual support. It was here that matters stood that when, for a while, diplomacy came to a halt. On the afternoon of January 18th, after he had helped Hatzfeldt draft a telegram to Berlin about Chamberlain's Chatsworth proposal, Eckstein dropped off on his London club. There, he happened to meet a court official who told him confidently that the Queen was dying at Osborne House. Queen Victoria began the year 1900, the last full year of her life, reading about British defeats in South Africa and poring over long casualty lists, dreading to read familiar names. She sent letters and telegrams to ministers and to officers in the field, exhorting them to suppress gloom, to organise victory, and meanwhile to ensure that everything was being done to provide for the safety and comfort of the cavalry horses making the long sea voyage to South Africa. In her wheelchair, she reviewed departing regiments and visited wounded soldiers in hospitals. I was wheeled up to the bed of each man, speaking to them and giving them flowers. They seemed so touched, and many had tears in their eyes. There were a great number of Irish soldiers, chiefly from the Dublin Fusiliers, Inniskillens, and Connaught Rangers. A few days later, the Queen made a dramatic change of plans for her usual spring holiday. Instead of going to the Riviera, which she had visited annually for many years, she decided to visit Ireland, where she had not set foot for 40 years. Her ministers were worried about the virulence of attacks in continental press against the Queen, the Prince of Wales, and England. Kiosks in Paris flaunted posters with vulgar, almost obscene caricatures of the Queen. Prominent Englishmen travelled to Europe attracted this cry of "Vive la Rose!" On April 4th, the Prince and Princess of Wales were aboard a train leaving the Gare du Nord in Brussels. A 15-year-old Belgian youth named Cepito jumped on the footboard outside their compartment and fired 4 shots at them from 6 feet away. Neither Prince nor Princess was captured. Cepito and 4 adult companions proved to be members of an anarchist group espousing anti-British pro-Boer sentiments. Cepito declared that the Prince was his target because he was an accomplice of Chamberlain in killing the Boers. No one in Britain wished to risk the Queen's life in such a climate. Besides, Victoria herself had already decided to go to Ireland. It was entirely my own idea, as was also giving up going abroad, and it will give great pleasure and do much good, she wrote to the Empress Frederick. She was grateful for the large number of Irish recruits who'd signed up to go to South Africa, and for their gallantry once in action. She decreed the wearing of the shamrock by Irish soldiers on St. Patrick's Day, and authorised the creation of a new regiment, the Irish Guards, in the Brigade of Guards. Her visit to Dublin, which lasted almost the whole month of April, became a personal triumph. Overriding views of her advisers, she drove through the streets without an armed escort, and the city which, 16 years later, rose in Easter Rebellion, cheered whenever she appeared. During the spring of 1900, the tide turned in South Africa. On February 28th, Ladysmith was relieved after a siege of 118 days. On May 19th, 5 days before the Queen's birthday, the siege of Mafeking was lifted. On May 24th, the Queen noted her birthday. In her journal, again, my old birthday returns, my 81st. God has been very merciful and supported me, but my trials and anxieties have been manifold, and I feel tired and upset by all I have gone through this winter and spring. The Queen's health was deteriorating. Rheumatic stiffness in her joints had required first a walking stick and then a wheelchair. In 1898, she had developed cataracts. She had used reading glasses in private since 1877. Now she was forced to wear them in public. She demanded larger and larger lettering and blacker ink in the confidential letters sent to her by Lord Salisbury. Everything else was read aloud to her by Princess Beatrice. In the summer of 1900, the strength and precision of her famous memory began to erode, and she had trouble finding the words she wanted to use in conversation. By July, she was losing weight and complained of back pain and insomnia. The doctors recommended naps. I now rest daily for a short while after luncheon, which is thought good for me, but loses time, she complained to her journal. At the end of July, Queen Victoria suffered a personal blow. Cancer had already taken her son-in-law, the Emperor Frederick. Her daughter Vicky, the Dowager Empress of Germany, lay ill at Hamburg, stricken by the same disease. Now came news that her second son, Alfred, Alfie in the family, the former Duke of Edinburgh and career naval officer, who had been Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet before succeeding in 1893 to the hereditary dukedom of Saxe-Coburg, was battling the relentless disease. Suffering from a painful tongue and throat, he had gone to Vienna for diagnosis. On July 25th, the Queen recorded terrible news. The malady appears incurable, and alas, one can only too well guess its nature. Afi himself is quite ignorant of the danger in which he is, and his doctors wish him on no account to be informed. Only 6 days later, the Duke's wife informed the Queen that he had died peacefully in his sleep, having been with us in the garden in the afternoon. The Queen could not contain her private grief. Oh God, my poor darling Alfie, Afi gone too, my third grown-up child. Besides 3 sons-in-law, it is hard at 81. I pray God to help me be, and have trust in him who has never failed me. Queen's grief was mostly kept mostly private, confided only to her family and her journal. A rare instance of semi-public complaint occurred during an exchange of letters with her old friend George Goschen, a member of the Unionist cabinet, who wrote that he would not be standing for re-election in the autumn campaign. He has now been more than 37 years in the House of Commons, and being in his 70th year, he felt that he may fairly claim relief from engrossing duties. Goschen wrote to the Queen, the last 5 years during which he has been First Lord of the Admiralty have been a period of great and continuous strain, and the overwhelming responsibilities of the post have contributed to make him desire some rest. The Queen read the letter with mixed feelings. Certainly, Goschen had earned his retirement, yet she had always hated having to deal with new people, and if the Admiralty was an overwhelming responsibility, what about the Crown? The Queen feels that he is fully justified in wishing for a rest, she finally wrote. She wishes she could have the same, even for the shortest period, for she does need it, and feels the constant weight of it. At 81, very trying and fatiguing. It's a good book. Anthony, do you have near constant military aircraft overhead? No, but apparently you might be picking up the background noise from my fan on my laptop. It's as far away as I can have it from the microphone, and still be able to read stuff. Imperium American, why did the Germans shut this deal down in Dudley Bromley? Because they think they can get a better deal by making the British wait, because they don't believe the British will engage in real politics. They have no study of British history. That they do not have friends or permanent things. They just have interests. And Clinton reminds me of the first modern history lecturer. Britain made a main mistake. It allied with France. Yes, but how do I put this? Britain had a choice. Germany wanted an alliance where Germany was the equal or the senior. Britain didn't want to be in any alliance where it was the junior partner in the rest of the world. Didn't mind being the junior partner in Britain, in Europe, and supplying the money more than the troops. It was happy to do that in Europe, but in the rest of the world, it had to be the senior partner. Germany wanted to be the senior partner. Britain was never going to agree to that. So Britain didn't have a choice. It either allied with France or would face a France and a France completely destroyed by Germany, and Germany with all the strength from that destruction. No. It's one of those situations where there's no good answer. Guess what? That's quite often in international relations. There's no good choice, there's only a least bad one. That rooms. East Rising 96 was hardly the whole city rising up in revolt. That's a rather slanted view of things taken by author for dramatic effects, I suspect. Yeah. China has a huge army, but to be a proper superpower on the world stage, you need a navy that can protect all your trade across the world. Then you need a lot more than just a navy. And also, let's put it this way. China is taking advantage of the fact that America after 1991, peace is broken out. Well, Cold War is over. We can stop building. Stop the pace of building. And that's what you've dealt with for the last 40 years. So a lot of American units are coming up for replacement and retiring because they were the Cold War surge, and they were felt not to be replaced the Reagan years because they were coasting on them, and now they're having to rebuild them. So, hey. America's having to... So that's why China's constant build-up is going to outpace the Americans. But China's also building the ships rather quickly. And as we all know, then you'll need to replace... These ships will come up for renewal. So that's the question, whether they actually get renewed or whether they just get built and end up in service for a long time. We don't know. We don't know what China's going to be like or what they're building for. Are they building for... Do they think there's going to be a point of decision in the 2030s? This is the point. How's it going? Well, been short but fun. Time to pack up and get ready for handover. Looks like Dreadnought is on my to-buy list for next book order. Enjoy, you'll like it. That's great. Thank you for the fluffy research assistance. That's always nice. Thank you. Super chats really do help, by the way. And the reason they help is because... well, it's not just the iron brew, it's the book habit that's really drains the finances. I've got to stop buying so many books. Nah, I won't. And now I get them sent to me for free to review. Make orders. Would have been very different, but I suppose UK were looking at France as their historic rivals and Russia as their bigger recent threat. And Russia kept making moves towards India. So yes. So that's Johnson. Last background noise I heard was Zebedee getting something. That was Raleigh and Zebedee both being annoyed with the delivery man. Juno 1, in the back so I can work and listen to Bruships. Cool. Hello, Juno 191. Duncan, far better ally with a secular republic run by a crypto-monarchist Catholics than a militant quasi-depositism. It's not a perfect choice, you say, but it's far more palatable than alliance. Yeah. Anathan, I'm sorry about the constant military aircraft comment. Made because we are the major military aircraft training area. It even had Swiss F-16s the other day. The Swiss? Yeah. Oh, they've got to replace their aircraft. That's going to be a fun one. That's still a fun debate. What are the Swiss going to replace their aircraft with? What are they going to buy? I know what I tell them to buy, but, you know. Dreadnought's time isn't listed. Oh, good lord. Well, I think it was 0205. Seems to not always update when I enter in the things, when I enter in the times. So I'll hope it's right, but hey ho. Engages medical brain. Tries to work out how long and slow a detox regime it would have to be to wean Dr. Clark a week. It quickly disengages medical brain. Nick orders, buy Grivens. Sheesh. Swiss will buy Raphael's. Neither that's a good option for the Swiss. Gripens maybe. But basically, they need something, if they're going to maintain their capability, they need something with short takeoff. And that can act as an interceptor. So it needs high speed. They don't really need strike. So honestly, you're looking at F-18s or Eurofighters, probably. They've already got F-18s from memory, so, you know. I don't think they'll buy Raphaels, because honestly, whilst Raphaels are very good, they are also very not good at being sold to countries which have very, very open procurement systems. And let's be honest, the Swiss procurement system is very, very well interrogated. It is very open, and you aren't going to get away with much of the background deals that might go on. Well, this is going to sound strange again. I do sometimes go about Iron Brew for a... Well, I don't normally when I'm doing Bruships and all the other things, because it tends to be Iron Brews what I have when I'm doing these lives. But I go a whole days without Iron Brew during the week. Nick Wallace, yeah, Super Haunts makes sense of that, guys. Thanks, Stafford. Gripen was designed specifically for that self-defense interceptor role, flying from hidden temporary bases. Yeah, I do agree. The Swedes and Swiss do get on here. Actually, the interesting thing here I keep thinking about is whether you could modify a Gripen to take off and land off a carrier like, let's say, Queen Elizabeth class. Because I like... yes, we always knew we weren't going to buy the full 138 Joint Strike Fighters. Everyone knew that. The question was whether we're going to get 80 to 96. Over the life to maintain at least 4 squadrons in service of 16 and plus supports and various other things. And it's an interesting question. Taiwan could also benefit from the Gripen. Adamson, Rafales have short to take off on the small carriers. Will place. Yeah, but you also have to remember France has been helping out the European Union in causing trouble for Switzerland in that they're trying to basically force the Swiss to join several European Union measures which the Swiss don't want to join. The Swiss get very, very protective over their national sovereignty and over control of things. And the European Union occasionally tries the whole we surround you sort of thing, so you have to join our program. And that causes them to get upset. And usually, fun enough, those incidents coincide with whenever the Swiss decide they actually want to spend their money on buying some defense equipment. So guess what's going on at the moment? Therefore, that means they are unlikely to buy the European options, even though that might be logical and fit them. The Swedish option, the Gripen, or the F-18 are probably options. I suppose the Joint Strike Fighter's an outside one, go for the B, but honestly, I can't see why they would want it, unless the Swiss are planning on making a unilateral strike on parts of Europe which are annoying the most. Look up the Gripen Maritime. Starbucks. Yeah, I have been looking up. I'm just wondering, though, if it's a Stobar rather than a Stovel. Well, not Stovel, but a Stol. Gripen. The I pronounce normal English. Expect English E. Gripen. Ah. Mandosolovic, what would you say to the idea that Czech Gripens have over 30,000 flight hours during 15 years? Well, that wouldn't surprise me because Gripens are good aircraft. They're reliable. That's the other thing. For 14 aircraft, that would suggest some very well trained pilots. Very, very well trained pilots. Right then. Next book. What do we fancy? Stobar. Short takeoff, barrier assisted recovery. That could be more difficult to integrate. Ooh. 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 Well, that's 3 for Naval Future. 4 for Naval Future now. And a 6. So, Naval Future. James Cable. 0234. Now, before I get into this, I'm going to give you some chapters. The chapters are the Trident and its passing, the causes of our present discontents, the relevance of sea power, contingencies of conflict, limited deterrent, the Alliance Naval War, the Orthodox case, Alliance Naval War, the choosing the threat, and Alliance Naval War, tasks and resources. 9 on the fringes of alliance, 10 if alliance fails, and 11 doing without a navy. So let's try 165. Doing without a navy. No serious proposal now current envisages doing without a navy altogether, but the ideas of us briefly cited would eliminate or reduce some of the naval roles now accepted, whether in the interest of economy or in order to concentrate available resources on another strategic task. Table 2 offers a summary analysis intent to bring out the implications for naval strategy rather than do full justice to ideas which even their authors have not always elaborated in much detail. The notion that Trident might be sacrificed in order to maintain the rest of the Navy at no less than its present strength has not been included. It has already been adequately discussed. Actually, what I will do, I have to admit, with this table, is I will take a picture and I will publish that. Now, where's my phone? So you can look. This book was published in 1983. Mm-hmm. I'll publish that on the YouTube quickly. In the section you can publish it in. Community plus post. Mm-hmm. That's been published. Naturally, each of these encapsulated ideas would be qualified, expanded, or presented in a more attractive guise. It would be grossly unfair to assess their merits without the fuller treatment which others, one hopes, will accord them. Nevertheless, it may plausibly be suggested that the two comments are likely to survive even an extended advocacy. The first is that the general tendency, differing only in degree from one to another of all these proposals, is to narrow the range and flexibility of strategic options. There is no need to specify the particular threads which could no longer be met in each of the 6 cases considered above. These should be obvious to readers who have followed the early arguments and who may well be suffited by conjecture. Moreover, it would be a tedious process to balance existing chances, in favourable circumstances only, of meeting some hypothetical threat, to the Falkland Islands, for instance, against the degree of hopelessness implied by the renunciation of an ocean-going navy or decision to concentrate on nuclear deterrent. A simpler test is the extent to which all these proposals, except number 3, rest on rather narrow assumptions. Of course, it is an established principle of gambling that betting on a single number, if it turns up, brings a greater reward than trying to spread one's money over every red possibility. Even in preparations for armed conflict, which so often assumes unexpected forms, the idea is not necessarily reprehensible. The case for choosing the threat to meet has already been argued, as have the insurmountable and superable obstacles to being strong enough for every threat. It is not the act of choosing that is open to question, but the nature of the choice. Some of these proposals are the result of polarized thinking. Either deterrence focused on the central front succeeds and peace is maintained, or war is nuclear, total and short. Either submarines and aircraft sink everything that can, or there is no naval confrontation. Either Britain threatens a nuclear strike, or she leaves the seas for others to contest. Low-level threats, probing, coercive diplomacy, limited war and protracted war are not considered. It is all or nothing. The Soviet Union is Britain's only opponent, and flexible response can be confined to the central front. Contracting the naval perimeter, which does not exclude support for American naval operations in the Eastern Atlantic, is a lesser change of strategy than adjustment to predictably reduced resources, another slice of the existing salami. It might become inevitable in one form or another. 2 remaining proposals have interesting premises, but the acceptability of the consequences is yet to be demonstrated. The idea that Britain disengagement from NATO, which could happen, in greater or lesser degree, for more than one reason, might actually reduce certain kinds of threat to Britain is not wholly absurd. It merely requires a number of rather unreliable assumptions about the likely repercussions abroad. Even if these are proved as favourable to Britain as they were to France, surely the most that could be expected, it's hard to see how Britain could preserve much sense of security without an ocean-going navy. This might not be needed, given a strong enough air force for deterrence of invasion, but the interdiction of Britain's seaborne trade is not an option that should be at the unfettered discretion of the Soviet Union, or any other, perhaps even a lesser naval power. If the objective is an independent foreign policy, not just a change of patron, then some of the savings on the continental commitment ought to be devoted to a stronger navy. As for cheaper and simpler ships, these are obviously desirable, and many ingenious proposals have been put forward made for building them. Some progress ought to be possible in this direction, but it is a path to be followed with caution and with full awareness of the risks and penalties involved. Otherwise, British naval officers might find themselves compelled to cultivate a Spanish irony. It is well known that we fight in God's cause, so when we meet the English, God will surely arrange matters so that we can grapple and board them, either by sending some strange freak of the weather, or more likely, just by depriving the English of their wits. But unless God helps us by a miracle, the English, who have faster and handier ships than ours, and many more long-range guns, and who know their advantage just as well as we do, will never close with us at all, but stand aloof and knock us to pieces with their culverins, without our being able to do them any serious harm. There are situations, a Norwegian scenario has already been suggested, in which superior ships can be outfaced. Nor do simpler, cheaper ships, particularly if they can be deployed in large numbers, have to be inferior even in combat. Missile-firing patrol craft can sometimes prove formidable opponents to larger and costlier warships. Unfortunately, sophistication is often necessary at the price of versatility. If economy in construction is to be pursued without requiring future British captains to sail in a confident hope of a miracle, a very clear conception will be needed of the strategic role of their ships, and of the tactics they and their enemies are expected to employ. This conception had also better be right. In the Second World War, simple ships, corvettes for instance, were successfully employed to defend convoys against submarines, themselves rather simple in those days. But different and more complex ships had to be used for other tasks. In a much smaller navy, such multiplicity is not easily achieved. Of course, simplification, unlike some proposals, is actually intended to arrest the shrinking of the navy, but the effort would be counterproductive if the price had again to be narrowing of the strategic options. This is a process, and the second major commitment applies to existing trends as well as the proposal outlined above, which exposes more than one flank. Concentrating one's capability on a limited range of conflicts may not only tempt an opponent to choose those other varieties, it may also prove incompatible with altered political purpose at home. The contraction of naval tasks and resources could ultimately tend towards doing without a navy altogether. This is not an immediate danger. Nobody of any influence in Britain now intends or even seriously contemplates it. The risk seems too remote to warrant any analysis of the form it might take or of its consequences. Naval shrinkage, after all, has been going on for more than 35 years. Compensation, in the medical sense of adjustment and adaptation, has been good. So it could be a ceremonial squadron and a Coast Guard fleet. The risk remains. If the process continues, and some of the proposals mentioned would impart a sharp acceleration, it might reach a critical point. Water, after all, can undergo prolonged cooling without perceptible change until it suddenly turns to ice. There are, in most organizations, limits to concentration, whether of size or functions. Beyond these, the muscles no longer support the limbs. The school cannot sustain the sixth form. The business case ceases to justify its overheads. The battalion has to be broken up, and its survivors distributed as reinforcements to other units. A gradual process may culminate in a sudden collapse. An obvious catalyst, in the case of the Navy, could be the advent of a new government and the discovery that the Navy had become either too small or else functionally too specialized to serve an altered political purpose. Logically, for instance, a government bent on renunciation of nuclear weapons and disengagement from NATO should have more need of a navy, not less. But if the navy had been run down after withdrawal from the Eastern Atlantic, or been reshaped around the nuclear deterrent, or contained only submarines, or could only operate against submarines, it might not fit the new strategy. In such a situation, and this scenario is available in more than one colour, voices would not be lacking, nor would all of them belong to politicians to suggest the resources be better voted to the Army and the Air Force than to refashioning a new navy. It's not only the enemy who may demand flexibility of response. It's a good book. Let's see. What have I missed? So F-35 is always a good choice for European Air Force, just by who that gives you commonality with and the relatively low unit cost. So I think that the vote is what we call the usual decisive British victory that we all know and love. Which year was this book published? 1983. And I now have 4 books on order from ABE Books. Cool. How many books called Gunboat Diplomacy are there that are good? Cable's one's good. There is like one other by someone whose surname begins with S, which is decent. And there is a reason the rest are in the box in the attic. They will be out once I have my library set up. Sam Thompson, well, not much older than you. Thank you for posting the table. Yeah, not much older than me. And now we are removing our legions on the right and looking at how poor the army has done procurement as a result. I think UK will be better off with the naval and air forces. Yeah, the poor army's going to go, oh god. Royal Marines are going, yay! We didn't ask for anything, so we're fine! And everyone else is looking at Royal Marines going, we're worried about you. You are basically... The Royal Marines are basically trying to turn themselves into jump jet troopers from Red Alert 2. And that's what they're doing. If you look at all those, that's what the Royal Marines are planning and turning themselves into. Basically, they want to all be Tony Stark. Fly into combat, turn up with a great big gun and go bang, bang, bang. That's their entire plan. Afternoon Rapido's back. Rapido's back. International relations in general can be very tedious. Yep. Adam. Engels and Ukraine have good runways, but if those two are under attack, we are all dead anyway. Rapid this makes me think about wars started by misunderstandings. Oh, there have been lots of those. Rapid without navies, what we do on Sundays? Read books about Romans. Although there are a lot less books about Romans than there are about navies. There are a lot more navies. Do you know what? I'm still waiting on a new book before I buy more and more books, lol. Yes, well, that book's coming. I'm waiting for it's going backwards and forwards to publishers. It's all fine. currently writing an article about it. Oh, Richard, was complete dissolution of the Iron ever seriously considered by any cabinet? No, as far as I know. And believe it or not, I have read a lot of cabinet papers to try and find that one out. A, Stafford, good luck with the pain. B, the book will be good. And this is going to sound strange, whatever you do, and of course I'm not speaking from personal experience because I would never do this, do not go swimming the same day you've had a tattoo. Chlorine is not good. I didn't do that, but I might have had a friend who was with me who did. And I promise you, I would never have laughed at my friend when they were jumping out of the pool in pain. Under no circumstances. Dan Freeman, Dr. Clark, I am worried about the Royal Marines after meeting a few of them. Very worried. We are all worried. We love them dearly, but we are worried. Samson, who doesn't want to be Tony Stark? Tony Stark? Neil Waddle. There is a serious school of thought that the US Marine Corps needs to be more like Her Majesty's Royal Marine Corps. That could be quite interesting. Come on, Royal Marines going as Tony Stark or Starship Troopers? The novel, not the movie. Well, I think you mean number 3 of the movies. First movie, no. Second movie, oh god, no. Third movie. At the end, there's a scene where they come down and they blow everything up. Yeah! Finally, that explains why they don't have tanks. Because if you are fighting an enemy like that, why would you not have tanks? You either have infantry, which are walking armoured beasts, or you have tanks with very rapid fire guns. You've got those nice big rifles anyway, scale them up, add a couple, double it up, put them in a turret, and put them in a tank which has armour which can resist it, and just have it going blasting, and just watch it. That would wipe out everything. Yes, possibly infantry would still have to go up into the mountains. But that's when you have air support. That you have spaceships. You have spaceships up there with fighters on. There is your air support. Why are you going up? Why, when you think you've got something coming in, do you not have an overhead cap to go? Well, enemy buzzy buzz coming in, blast it. The movies are just no. Sorry. The books are good. Thompson also going to shovel now. Phone my day. Take care. Good luck. But are there any books about Roman navies? Yes, Simon Elliott, who we had on Bruships, on bilge pumps, not Bruships, and he's going to be on us coming on again. The autumn. 2 Royal Marines were instructors at infantry school when I went through. I love them. They are good. Come on, off topic, but trains. So, what's the best train in the transport for Wales fleet, in your opinion? And of the class 107 for inner city and regional services, name out. For Wales fleet, do you mean modern or steam generation? Because if it was steam, I'd always go Hall class because they're my favourites. But they were lovely on Cornwall and the Welsh lines. Obviously, had to switch to my tablet and let on speakers. Now my little one has her first naval lecture. Public pools are closed and there's about 8 inches of ice over the water. Yeah, so no worries about that. Thank you for the advice if I get another in the summer. Yeah. You're writing an article that doesn't publicly exist yet. I'm writing an article based on a book which would come out in a magazine called Britain at War at the same time as the book gets published. Think what? It's not chlorine, but I had a friend go to get a daisy chain tattoo and around her arm. The pain said a single daisy would be better. Hello, Bijon. Referee's like, there's a difference between laughing and guffawing hysterically. Kingsford, I still have no idea why the Royal Canadian is calling their naval infantry the Naval Tactical Operations Group and not the Royal Canadian Marine Commandos. Because they're worried about the army trying to get control of them. Tom Golding, in the Imperium from 40k have worked out a pretty good bug extermination doctrine. Just saying. Yes, they have. Dynamic comment, you need to keep in mind your iron brew pressure. Yes, I do. Do you know what? Delivery date for your book to Canada is May the 6th, if I remember correctly. It's supposed to come out in end of March in the UK. Calvin Goswick, I will. The Royal Marines are looking at jetpack troopers. Yes. Tom Golding, if the independent Welsh Navy copied the Iranians, that might be interesting. That'd be scary. Come on. Modern, also, Class 107 is a 105 with ironing board seats and same layout for in-city as regional. It was fun with the modern trains. And US Marine Corps is going down the modern light infantry route, i.e. based around Toyota Hilux plus PGM, where that includes drones, rockets versus tube artillery. It'll be fun. Right. Britain's naval future. Good one. Alright then. And next book. Go on. We'll go on to 9:30, and then I'll take... The fluffy research assistant hasn't yet started campaigning for his evening wander. He didn't get his midday wander because it was snowing, and he honestly poked his head out the door and went... Actually did that. And promptly turned back in. I was sort of going, yes, you like snow. So I decided it was a bit cold for him. He likes snow, but he doesn't like it freezing snow. Come on, Wales can make it in life painful for England with faster Statecraft. You see, now here's the thing. Wales would try, but the only major port that would really affect would be Liverpool. And I love my girlfriend, right? And I love my dad came from Liverpool, and my girlfriend comes from the Wirral, so I can say this with an open heart. The people the Welsh least want to annoy in that area are the people from Liverpool and the Wirral. They would collectively probably not wait for the British Army. They would probably wander into Wales, find their navy, turn it to scrap iron, probably sink whatever remains of their politicians with their navy, and then come back. Never doubt also their ability to build whatever they need to do the job. After all, Camel Laird's is there. They have their own heavy manufacturing facility. End War by Richard Holbrook, Global Military History, to End a War, Renaissance Monarchs, and the last thing Draken you need to get into is Mech Warrior. But I do with Alexander. We'll get into Mech Warrior. Yeah, that's good. Do you think the British expected the Russians not to use the name for military uses, or was it method of balancing the jet tech gap? A bit of both. That's what. Avonmouth near Bristol is a major port that the Welsh could effectively cut off. Yes, but the Liverpudlians will be after them. Right, so I think the majority went to end the war. Right. In true history and tradition, this is one of those ones which was from a library. And actually, this came from the Washington Centerville Public Library. And is testimony to the fact that I do, sometimes I have to hunt long ways for these books. So this is from Centerville, Ohio, this book. It was costed originally, when published in the USA, $27.95. Canada, $38.95. And then let's try the longest weekend. The historian must constantly put himself at a point in the past at which the known factors will seem to permit different outcomes. If he speaks as Salamist, then it must be as if the Persians might still win. If he speaks of the coup d'etat of Brumaire, then it must remain to be seen if Bonaparte will be ignominiously repulsed. This is Johann Rehusia, which is considerably true. Our diplomatic shuttle reached new intensity. With a travel schedule that changed every few hours, we moved so unpredictably across Europe that Washington often did not know where we were. Driven by the bombing and by the sense that it was now all or nothing, we felt ready to take on almost any challenge, so much so that in the midst of the Bosnian shuttle, we took on an additional yet related problem. 2-year-old crisis between Greece and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, where 500 American troops were deployed to prevent hostilities. Hardly dawned on us that the Labor Day holiday was starting in the United States. Our own weekend would take us to Belgrade, Bonn, Brussels, Geneva, Zagreb, Belgrade, Athens, Skopje, the capital of Macedonia, Ankara, and back for a third time to Belgrade. During those 4 days, we would arrange and announce the first high-level meeting among the three warring parties in 2 years, meet our contact group colleagues and half a dozen Central European heads of government in Bonn, spend most of the night in NATO headquarters in Brussels arguing for the resumption of the bombing, meet representatives of the Organization of the Islamic Conference in Geneva to get Muslim support for our efforts, negotiate a draft agreement with Milosevic and Izbekov for the high-level meeting, the first such agreement that would ever hold, resolve the dangerous situation between Greece and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, plead for resumption of bombing while holding off another invitation to Jimmy Carter to step into the negotiations. Jimmy Carter keeps wanting to step into the negotiations. Why? I love him. He's one of the nicest guys that have been president of the United States. Why does he keep wanting to jump into negotiations? Friday, September the 1st. NATO suspended its bombing on Bosnia at 5 a.m. on Friday, September the 1st. I had told Washington that we would support a short halt so that the UN commander, General Benir could negotiate with Mladic, but only if the pause would end promptly if the Bosnian Serbs did not agree to lift the siege of Sarajevo. With considerable precedence, Hill and Padru warned that my position could cause a serious problem. It would be hard to resume the bombing once it was stopped. They feared because the UN and some Europeans would try to prevent its resumption, no matter what the circumstances. As if to prove Hill and Padru right, UN headquarters in Zagreb, hiding its own desire for a total bombing halt behind our highly conditional support for a brief pause, told the press that the pause was at our request, a line that prompted a strong criticism of us by New York Times columnist William Safir. The afternoon before the bombing halt began, we met General Janvier in his headquarters at Zagreb. Janvier, a small, unhappy-looking man, gave the impression that he wished he were somewhere else, and politely offered evasive non-responses. He was certainly waiting for us to disappear, as had so many other negotiators in the previous 3 years, so that he could get on with his own work. His demeanour suggested that he thought he could negotiate successfully with Mladic if only we would leave him alone. Milosevic received us at Monarchy, one of the many hunting lodges Tito had maintained around the country. About 30 minutes from the downtown Belgrade, it was a collection of modest buildings set among large fields and forests on the edge of a lake, not as fancy as Tito's more favoured retreats. We sat at a long table outside the main house.
eating and drinking almost continuously. Milosevic had added to his entourage Nikolai Kolovich, a short, plump, and hard-drinking Shakespeare scholar who taught English literature in Michigan. Kolovich held the title of Vice President of Republic Srpska, but he was not trusted by the hard mountain men of Pale, the leaders of Bosnian movement, who viewed him as a Milosevic stooge. Kolovich liked to quote the bard selectively to support his positions, frequently making statements like, "The quality of mercy is not strained," or "The fault, dear Brutus." Trying to keep even in the Shakespeare contest, I would offer up half-remembered phrases such as "cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war," or "there is a tide in the affairs of men." The meeting at the hunting lodge rambled on for 12 hours, with a break during which we returned to our hotel for a short press conference. Milosevic had changed the venue in order to create a more relaxed atmosphere. There was heavy drinking for much of the day, which clearly affected Kolovich, but I saw no evidence, then or later, that the alcohol affected Milosevic's judgment. The Americans drank little, and I began a policy of accepting Milosevic's frequent offers of drinks only when we reached agreements. Jim Pardue later called it the day of bonding with the Godfather. Milosevic could switch moves with astonishing speed, perhaps to keep others off balance. He could range from charm to brutality, from emotional outbursts to calm discussion of legal minutiae. When he was angry, his face wrinkled up, but he could regain control of himself instantly. Near the beginning of the meeting, I suggested that we take a walk, accompanied only by General Clark. As he led us through the woods and fields behind the hunting lodge, he talked with nostalgia about his trips to New York as a banker. "I wanted to smell that wonderful New York air again," he said, and he seemed to be serious. He described his career as a successful Yugoslav businessman during the late Tito era, and for the first time he talked to us about the need for regional economic cooperation, ignoring his own central role in the destruction of Yugoslavia. When we returned to Villa, we asked him about this famous 1989 speech at Kosovo that ignited Serb extremism. He vigorously denied that this was intent, and repeated his accusation that Ambassador Zimmerman had sought to turn international opinion against him by organizing a diplomatic boycott of the speech. But Milosevic made an interesting omission. "I was wrong not to meet with Ambassador Zimmerman for so long," he said. "I was angry at him, but I should not have waited a year." Chris Hill, who knew the history in detail, defended Zimmerman, and reminded Milosevic that the speech had been inflammatory by any standards. It's an interesting book.
Ramparezzo, I thought snow was rare in Britain. Yes, snow's so rare in Britain that I have snow chains for my tyres on my Subaru. It's rare in London, and it's rare in certain parts, but in other parts of the country, you get quite a lot of snow. And some of the places I travel, you can get very, very deep snow. Hello, Financial Intelligence. Hello, so much for Russian drills. Hi. Vision, I got lots of books I order from the UK. Not uncommon. My parents, for their Etsy business, are always mailing packages to Britain. I got a book I'm bidding on now from the UK. Do you know 191? Who is mixing beer in the pot pile? I'm 21 and I'm going to have an aneurysm. Huh? Do you know sorry, I'm the only one who's allowed to organize stockroom at work. Someone's been messing with it. Yeah, sounds like someone's trying to wind you up. Chains made of snow? No, the metal, the snow tire, they're basically chains you put over the tires to give it extra grip in snow. Carmen, have you ever been to Pembrokeshire? Yes, but more importantly, I've been on the moors, Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor. There's lovely places, and there's been some areas I go up in the north of England, etc. Yeah, I had some fun a few years back I was driving up to a certain naval base in Scotland. Lovely place. And, yes, snow hit. And I'd gone off the motorway because I got fed up with the traffic on the motorway because the motorway was being nutty. So I went off on the side roads and I just put the chains on my tyres when I reached some very interesting substances. And at the time I had a Volvo, and that just went, thank you, I've got chains on my tyres now. Bye bye. That was a police car which was going, yeah, you can't go this way, you can't go this way. He goes, looked at my tyres, went, you can go that way, sir. Carry on. Thank you. I love policemen. They're very practical in this sort of country. Bromley. Yeah, I was getting bombing more, but I got Bromley. I don't know. Vision. Centreville seems a common name in the USA. Pennsylvania has some strange names, like near Lancaster, the adjoining town sounds of fertility and intercourse. Well, that's a good place to visit. Carmen, and what parts of our wonderful historical country do you visit? You should totally check out where I work. I wander all around the country occasionally. Don't know how. Can we hire you to stay on the Norwegian border and hand out snow chains? No. I like using my snow chains. That's why I have a Subaru now. That's just evil when you put the snow chains on the Subaru, and it just goes, yay! I do cross country in these things. My dad got told not to go up a hill by a policeman. He went to the next road, went up it, and was told, "You can't come up this road." Replied, "Well, I'm up it now, so I'm just going to drop my mum her shopping off." I never saw you as a Scooby-Doo kind of man. It's fun. Next car I probably would have liked to get is a Toyota Hilux if I was going to get one. But I think both my mum and my girlfriend would complain about that one. Plus, I'm fairly sure several people who like the environment will be upset with me driving a Hilux around. Vision. Never seen snow chains after 38 years in upstate New York. All-weather tires even replaced the old snow tires. I have all-weather tires. I always make sure I get all-weather tires for my car because I do travel around, and honestly, it's going to sound strange, but some areas the mud you get is worse than snow by a long way. The mud is worse. If you want interesting book shopping, hit the discard past the local library. I do. Right. So, next book. Possibly our last book for the evening. Because at some point I will have to go and walk the fluffy research assistant because he's starting to make a noise. I'm not sure if you can hear him. Renaissance monarchs got one. Global military history got one. That's good. My dad used to drive trucks. He was a traffic jam and turned down a country lane to skip a junction. Turned out to be a 5-mile track to a farm. Had to back up the entire way. People had followed him. Ooh. Count. Hyundai Terracan, a great 4x4, large, powerful, and reliable. I only ever had brakes needing replacing in 8 years of having it. Cool. Diplomat off duty, so we've got 3 votes in. Grace Nelson, once in Ontario, was driving in winter and heard the roar of engines coming up behind. Nothing mirrors. Louder, still nothing. Until 2 skiddos zoomed past alongside the road. Naval Ops. Yeah, I'm not sure where Naval Ops is. Thanks, Nick Waters. Sometimes on 40 miles north of me, a studs on Mantry. You can borrow my V8 4x4 Dodge Dakota when you come to see Haida. Cool. Actually, what I might do, depending on the finance of the time, is go, would you like to have a couple of days off and I'll pay you for the things to drive me around? But, or me and Drac around, possibly, if we manage to arrange it. We are figuring out things. Because we both, there are lots of, the one thing this has certainly made us on both fronts is, well, on me, it's made me want to spend more time with my girlfriend. And definitely try and take her on a holiday at some point. When this is all over. And secondly, there are a whole list of ships which I want to go visit, and I haven't had a chance to visit because I've been held up, and I'm going to try and get the finances and go visit them. The naval operations in the war between Great Britain and the United States by Theodore Roosevelt. So we've got Naval Ops, 2 votes for Naval Ops, 1 for Diplomat off duty, 1 for Global Military History, and 1 for Renaissance Monarchs. Okay, it's Naval Ops. We do love this book on this channel. Mainly because, and I'm slowly working up a full collection of Theodore Roosevelt's publications. Slowly, he says, because I've got like 4 of the 20 of them. And it takes time to track down decent copies. I can find copies. It's finding a decent copy I can use and photocopy for teaching. So, it is often difficult to realize that in a clash between two peoples, not only may each side deem itself right, but each side may well and may really be right from its own standpoint. A healthy and vigorous nation must obey the law of self-preservation. When it's engaged in a life and death grapple with a powerful foe, it cannot too closely scan the damage it is incidentally forced to do neutral nations. On the other hand, it is just as little to be expected that one of these neutral nations, when wronged, will retain from the retaliation merely because the injuries are inflicted by the aggressor as a regrettable but necessary incident of the conflict with someone else. This holds true of the bickering war between Britain and America, which closed the gigantic Napoleonic struggles. During nearly a quarter of a century of tremendous warfare, Britain and France stood as opposing champions in a struggle which dwarfed all previous contests and convulsed the entire civilized world. As has been seen, every other nation of Europe was at one time or another drawn into this struggle, and almost every other nation sided now with one and now with the other of the great central pair of combatants. Russia and Spain, Austria and Prussia, Holland and Turkey appeared, now as the subservient allies, now as the bitter enemies of Republican and Imperial France. The Isle of Monarchy alone never wavered and never faltered. In the countless shifting coalitions framed against France, there was always one unshifting figure, that of Britain. Kaiser and king, Tsar and courts might make war or sue for peace, but save for one brief truce, the people of Britain never for a moment relaxed their deadly strain of hostility, which at least at last wore out even Napoleon's giant strength.
It was a life and death struggle, and to win, Britain had spent her gold, her ships, and her men like water. Where she was thus lavish of her own wealth and her own blood, it was not to be expected that she would pay over-scrupulous heed to the exact rights of others, above all, if those rights were exercised seriously to her own disadvantage. While the fight stamped to and fro, the combatants were far too busy with one another to care whether or not they trampled on outsiders. In the grim, relentless, long-drawn warfare, neither side had any intention of throwing away a chance by quixotic over-regard for the rights of others, and both sides were at times seriously to blame for disregarding these rights on occasions when to regard them would not have been quixotic at all, but an evidence of sound common sense. The scarlet-clad armies of Britain played a great part in the closing years of the struggle, and developed as their leader the chief of all the generals who fought under or against Napoleon. Nevertheless, it was the Navy of Britain, it was the British sea power, which threw the deciding weight into the contest. The British Navy destroyed the fleets of France and the fleets of the Spanish, the Dutch, and the Danish allies of France, blockaded the French ports, and the ports of all powers that were not hostile to the French. In order to man the huge fleets which she kept command of the seas, England was forced to try every experience to gather sailors, and in order to make a blockade effective, she had to lay a heavy hand on the ships of those neutral powers that found their profit in breaking the blockade. The United States of America was the only neutral power which at once both tended to drain the British Navy of a certain number of seamen, and at the same time offered her own seamen a chance for the same navy to make good the loss. Moreover, it was the one neutral nation which throve apace during the years of European warfare by trading with the hostile powers. So long as they were not too much harassed, the American merchants and seamen were greatly benefited by the war in Europe. Destruction of the French merchantmen by the British warships and the constant harrying of the British merchantmen by the French privateers tended to drive trade into neutral bottoms, and America was the only neutral nation prepared to profit greatly by this tendency. She made the loss of England her gain. Her merchant ship cargoes to French ports, and her merchant captains, as their trade grew apace and as they became short-handed, welcomed eagerly all British seamen, deserters or otherwise, who might take service on the British flag, in the hope of avoiding the press gang and the extreme severity of British naval discipline. The Americans were merely exercising their rights, but naturally their attitude exasperated not only Britain, but also France. Each of the two main combatants was inclined to view with suspicion the neutral, who made a cold-blooded profit out of the sufferings of both. Each took harsh and often entirely unjustifiable measures to protect himself. Each in his action was guided very naturally by his own interests as he saw them. It was Britain with which America ultimately came to blows, because Britain possessed far greater power of inflicting injury. But according to his capacity, Napoleon showed a much more callous disregard for American rights. The British claimed the right to forbid vessels to sail to or from ports which they announced as blockaded, and to search neutral ships for contraband goods. They also acted upon the doctrine that once a subject, always a subject, and that their warships could at any time take British sailors wherever found on the high seas. The intense vexation and heavy loss caused by the right of search need not be dwelt with. The impressment of American seamen was an even more serious business. Thousands of British sailormen were to be found on American vessels. Britain reclaimed these at every opportunity, but she did not rest content with this. Each British war vessel regarded itself as the judge as to whether the members of the crew of a search British ship vessel were British or Americans. If the captain of such a war vessel was short-handed, he was certain to resolve all doubts in his own favour, and consequently thousands of impressed Americans served, sorely or against the grain, in British warships. The whole situation was one that could not but provoke intense irritation. There was much fraud in the naturalization of British seamen as Americans, and on the other hand, there was much brutal disregard of the rights of American sailors by British warships. The American merchant cared nothing for the contestants, save that he wanted to sell his goods where he could get the best price, while the British officer was determined that the American should not render help to France. From their respective standpoints, each nation had much to say in its own favour. Consistently with retaining her self-respect, America could not submit quietly to the injuries she received. On the other hand, Britain could not afford, because of any consideration of abstract right, to allow any neutral nation to furnish Napoleon with another weapon. War was almost inevitable. It's a good book. Rob Roseway, this is a stupid question, but I have to ask. If Englishmen like hot tea and think iced tea is weird, has anyone thought about hot iron brew? No. Hot iron brew, yuck. You can actually reduce iron brew down on the stove and make a very nice sort of dew to paint over turkey, but we'll leave that to one side. Again, use
this sort of iron brew for it, not this sort. This is lovely iron brew and very expensive. It's the original edition to drink. It was a special edition produced for their anniversary. It's lovely, and that's why it came in glass bottles. This is what you reduce down, and basically you'll need to reduce a litre down almost to make a proper Jew for a turkey, a good-sized turkey. That's Thompson. Does Clark Thompson Taxi Service happy to help? Thank you. Jackhand, love tea, love iced tea equally. My mum drinks iced tea occasionally. Financial tennis. Part of the pleasure of drinking is the temperature's effect. This is why hot tea is also popular in Russia. Didn't know there. Hello. It makes no sense to drink iced tea. It does in Alabama, as Financial Intelligence says. Carmen, I met Drac as he visits where I work at all, and I really want to go visit loads of ships. Also, you should visit the Pembroke Dock Heritage Centre. Believe me, they have designs from old yard which built 5 Royal yachts and many warships. Oh, cool. I have to visit there. I was asking, when buying my Duster, they told me it had all weather. Drove it all winter, and then checked those were summer tyres. Still kept better than other cars on winter tyres. That's good. Vision. War of 1812 was pushed by USA over the issue of Western expansion and British support of native tribes. The maritime interest. New England was very anti-war, despite shipping naval in the century. Yeah, in and out. I'm trying to think of which would be worse, being in Birmingham, Alabama, or Birmingham, Birmingham. That'd be cruel. I'm not going to say which would be worse, though. Rapid Razorback. Regrettable but necessary incident sounds like a very British description of something massively bad, even in a book by Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah, these things happen. Financial and transit. Yeah, I can never understand the greed, but the USA really is driven by money. Yes and no. Vision. In the War of 1812, the US was the aggressor, not Britain. The US failed to go to war over Chesapeake incident. Ship owners opposed the war. Impressment was bigger issue under Jefferson. Thus his embargo. Neil Woodham, I need to go soon. My beautiful bride has remembered some honey-do things I need to do before dinner. Take care. Good luck with the honey-do list. Hello, Skippy Africanus. Massie's Dreadnought. Ooh. We did that. And this one was done at 0220, I think. 0320? 0317, if I remember correctly. And that was 0250. Right then, let's see. And financial intelligence, that was mainly hidden because of spelling. Okay, so take care, Jack Hunter. Enjoy the Super Bowl. And I've always found the War of 1812 an interesting one. Barely known about in the UK now due to it being about the same time as Napoleonic Wars, but also a major thing to many Americans. Yeah. Secondly, how it incorporated many different aspects of major ships being built for lakes, naval fighting all along the coast of North and South America, as well as Washington being burned. Yeah. When we start doing amphibious warfare, we do it properly. We're called Britain. We'll burn your capital. The reason the White House is white. Because the British burnt it. After nicking the victory dinner you prepared inside it. Vision. Actually, emotion drives Americans more than profit. But look at our politics from the Mayflower to now. I would argue that was probably more the case, yes. That's good. Most people will agree neither one. Rather, the reason for war has ceased to exist was victory over Napoleon. Yeah, that's the problem for the Americans, because here's the worst case scenario for the Americans in the War of 1812. They still continue fighting after Napoleon's defeated. And the British and some of their allies, potentially, decide to come over and pay them a visit. That could be kind of interesting. And problematic. Right. So, I'm gonna... Well, I'll finish up by answering questions for a bit, and until about 20... Well, let's say I'll do about 8 minutes answering questions, if anyone has any questions which aren't book-related or just general questions. Just to the end. So let's see, what are the questions coming through? Mm-hmm. And that should all be figured out, so that sorts out that. Okay. Oh, I've had a few questions come through. For some reason it took a while for them to wait. They didn't. That's good. Okay, that's clear. Oh, you were having issues with the garrison we left at Halifax. Welcome to a load of battle-hardened regulars and the rest of the Royal Navy. Yeah, that's pretty much how the fun would have gone. Dan Freeman, if the War of 1812 had not still been going on, Wellington would have had a lot more of his Peninsula campaign veterans for Waterloo. Yes. And if it had still been going on after Waterloo, then Wellington would have had a lot more of his Peninsula campaign veterans for America. Plus, him and Cochrane would be out there in charge of the war. So, Wellington and Cochrane out there fighting the Americans. Financial intelligence. Napoleon's comeback was in no way likely to turn out other than it did because of US opportunism. Nope. To be honest, I spent a weekend in Kensington in the 1980s. The people weren't approachable. However, I got a UK PhD. I got into a UK PhD, so I now reside at London for archives. Really looking forward to that. Don't worry about Kensington. Kensington is its own place. I have gone in. Kensington isn't even in nicest way, Scipio. When I walk around Kensington, it's kind of like when I walk into a club. I start stalking like this because this is, you have to go into this accent. This is how you have to sound in Kensington to actually get anywhere at all. You have to start sounding like that. I wish it would change, but, it's okay. But you just have to understand what accent works in which part of London. Unfortunately, some of them do have accent snobbery. JSL. Why do most people think that just because it's not being used in guns blasting actions that certain technologies are obsolete? Because most people forget that these weapon systems come back. Anthony, why haven't navies gone back to smoothbore like tanks have? Better for PGM. Because honestly, for navies, it's going to sound strange. Look at the ranges they're working at. That tells you tanks are looking at a certain range. Navies are looking at a different, far longer range, and they need to maintain accuracy over that range. It's probably going to be interesting if you see more guided rounds coming in the shells. Then probably we'll be getting the more smoothbore. We'll come back. Vision, your article in Britain War is on your Tribals Battles Area book. Yes. Yes, it is. What's right? Yes, this is, as I explained in the beginning, me and my girlfriend send cards to each other on not just Valentine's Day, but on the day we first kissed, would have to be the 7th of February, which is why I can remember it every year, because all the Valentine's announcements happen, and even dyslexic boyfriend can remember that it's the week before Valentine's Day. Although I do also have Google Calendar programmed, and phone calendar programmed, and about 4 other programs, systems for programs to remind me. And it's a very nice card from my girlfriend. Put there so she could see it if she was watching, which I think she was. Fast attack craft versus corvette. Is there a difference? Yes, usually a corvette is supposed to be slightly longer range. So fast attack craft is usually something which you don't expect to spend a lot of time away from port, maybe maximum a day or 2. A corvette you'd expect to be able to spend about a week away from port, or longer, depending on which navy you're in. Financial intelligence. By 1815, the British thoroughly understood Napoleon's art of war and wrecked him at that repeatedly. Yeah. Thank you. I'm writing on 1922 Washington Treaty and the anti-war movement in the US and UK. Ooh. Well, I do a fair amount on the Washington Naval Treaty, so I'll look forward to talking to you about that. And hopefully, if you're over in the UK, you and I can meet up and have a chat, a jolly good chat about it all. It doesn't. When friend went to Cambridge for a PhD, he was fit enough to be able to walk to Boston under 5 minutes. He now cycles for fun. Descott, do you think the UK would annex the US or make them into a puppet state if they won the war in 1815? Probably the latter. Actually, annexing the state would be annoying. But we might well take certain harbours. We might do kind of what we did with Hong Kong and China, in that we would take certain harbours in perpetuity by treaty. So probably we'd have gone for New York and New Orleans as being permanently British harbours. So you'd have had a Hong Kongization of New York and New Orleans as the price for peace. Maybe Charleston as well. That could be interesting for the Americans and the American Civil War if New York, New Orleans, and Charleston were in British hands. Yay! That would cause fun. Wonderful. So if in Kingston, I'm automatically posh. Yes. King's Rook. Any video planned on covering the international relations implications of the Northwest Passage and the views of both sides on the debate? That's going to be a bilge pumps episode at some point. Once I sort out, and if anyone's watching, I have emailed back, and some of the emails have bounced back, I don't know why, from the Google account to the people I've emailed who have submitted to the bilge pumps. So I will be contacting you. If I haven't managed to contact you already, I apologize. They are coming. Between builders and Google acting up, my life is currently being made. It's being made immeasurably more annoying. Tom Godding, my girlfriend frequently deposhes her accent to attempt to blend in with people in her office. Kind of harsh to take the mick for people mick for speaking well. Yeah, they do. Go home. And now the girlfriend knows I'm happy. No, the girlfriend does know. My girlfriend knows completely all about me, and my limitations, but she knows I try, and I think she accepts me for that one and loves me for trying as hard as I do to make sure I don't forget these things. The trouble is, I get dates confused on a regular basis. This is why I have a diary and a calendar, and why I organise things quite as strictly as I do. Trent Lenko. Hello, Trent. Alan, any views on USN small amphibious ships? Well, they've gone all the way around the houses to reinvent the LST. That's what they're basically reinventing. So, honestly, if I was the Americans, I'd be going, which nation currently operates a decent ship we could basically take off the shelf and build and modify to our standards? Let's see. Can carry about 400 to 600 personnel, plus their equipment. Has the ability to offload it onto beaches. Perhaps independently or land it itself. Well, you're either talking about the Bay class or you're talking about various variations on that going around. Okay. They'll get there eventually. There's got nothing on the West Coast. At this point when we're talking about it, America doesn't really have much on the West Coast that would really interest the British. Maybe Seattle, but why do they really want it? I wonder if the CSA would try to take Charleston from the British. That would be amusing. Well, seeing as the CSA would probably be relying on the British, and think about under those circumstances, then the Union blockade becomes very difficult because they can't exactly blockade British ships going into a British port. So all the Confederates have to do is go to the border with Britain, with Charleston or with New Orleans, and set it. And plus, you probably have a railway running from New Orleans to Charleston to New York because the British would have built it, right? So you probably have a railway. So it would be very interesting the effect it would have on the American Civil War. It'd be quite a cool thing to war game, actually. Now, Danny, right. Do those of us who like reading about warships or watching material about them have a name? Armchair Admiral seems a little insulting. Maybe naval nerds? Warship wonks? Anyone have better ideas? What I would just call them called us naval enthusiasts. That's what I tend to subscribe to. Armchair Admiral can be used as an insult. Naval enthusiast tends to work. Financial intelligence. The UK policy since 1783 has been to set up the USA as an ally. By the way, the USA almost went to war against France instead of Britain in the 1810s. Yes. But, you know, even allies have limitations, and having New York, New Orleans, and Charleston would have been quite nice for the British economy. Peter Dawson. Isn't 2,000 meters long range for tanks, but short range for warships? They're a little bit longer than 2 kilometers, but yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes phone died. Hot chocolate time. Enjoy the hot chocolate. Good luck, Stafford, on that one. Tom Godwin. UK held treaty ports during the American Civil War. It would really hamstrung both causes, as it effectively kills the Anaconda Plan, but also could really place the supply of Confederates' arms at risk if British decides to. Yeah. Vision. British Army victory in 1812 might well have ended up with Maine and Vermont added to Canada. Northwest Territories could have been seceded too. Ooh, that could be fun. Strub. Doctor, what period of time do you think the State Department or Foreign Ministry used the Navy the best? Probably for the US, it's the 1950s and 1960s. For Britain, it's probably 1920s and 30s, and probably 1890s. Seems to go quite bad in the early 1900s. Van Derp scored. Why have Seattle when you already have Vancouver? To secure Vancouver. The UK is seeing the USA wasn't encouraging the crazy European revolutions towards the USA with Oregon Treaty. His name I can't recall. Yeah. Probably standard gauge. Financial region says no way the UK could have allied with Confederate slaves. No, but they could have traded with them. And if the Confederates are still able to sell their cotton, well. Anyway, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. And Yeah. Hope you all had a nice evening. I'm just trying to find my socks. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Take care, King's Rook. Thank you, Dan Freeman. And Financial Intelligence and Vision. Thank you. Thank you, Dylan Lair and John Shea. Thank you. Cajun, enjoy the weather with the fluffy research assistant. I will. There also appears to be someone running around quite stupidly in a Lamborghini. Derp Squad, thank you. My understanding was the UK always preferred the Union over the CSA. The Union having the industrial capacity both for source and destination for trade goods from the UK. Oh, yes, they did, but, you know, Britain likes to make money. All hail the mighty Catalina. Take care, Cajun. Sav Thompson, thank you. Sticker PR France, thank you. Take care. Danny Wright, thank you. Thank you. I don't know if I've seen him before recently, so thank you, Danny Wright. And thank you, Paul Johnson. Thank you. And Silly Monaco and Grosowski, thank you. Rick Vasava, thank you. Abazaski, thank you. Enjoy. And Dermot Hammer, good night, everyone. May the Blackburn watch over you until next time. That worries me so much. Thank you, Mayor Salvak and Carmen Gasberg. Good walk. Remember, Riff's Coalition Samas. DG40, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's been lovely as always. I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you, Derp Squad. Thank you, Dylan Lair and Garrett Vassars and Carl Harmon, Dan Freeman. Thank you for being media moderating this evening, Dan. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And Frank Cusick, thank you. Oh, I should add that, yeah, I'll talk later. I'll send you a message later, Dan. So, thank you very much, and take care. Bye.